You're listening to Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Dark Matter Radio Network. Don't run and hide. Don't be afraid. Don't turn away any longer. The truth will set you free. And now, your host, the captain of conspiracy, the prince of paranormal. This ain't your daddy's radio network show. This is Jimmy Church, Fade to Black.
What's up? All right. Woo, here we go. Another week. This is Fade to Black. Today's Wednesday, February 26th, 2014. 56 days into the new year. As always, we are live from the JP Motorsports Studios right here in Burbank, California. Just to let everybody know, Los Angeles is in panic mode. It's Stormageddon 2014. We're supposed to get a half an inch of rain, for over the next 3 days. Everybody's like freaking out. It hasn't started raining yet, but, by the end of the show tonight. For KJCR and the Dark Matter Radio Network, I am your host, Jimmy Church. Welcome, everyone. Coast to coast. Let's get this show cracking. We got a great show lined up tonight. I got a lot of stuff I need to get out of the way before we get to Mr. Redfern. You know how I start off every show. Started off with a salute to the proud men and women in uniform fighting the good fight for us all around the world. Without them, there is no me. There is no you. There is no us. And you can't hear me right now. Think about it. I think for the first 5 minutes tonight, I'm going to do my best, John B. Wells. Happy birthday. Happy birthday to singer Michael Bolton, 61 years old. Oh, I had to do it. I had to do it. Loved him in that movie Office Space, by the way. Our dead guys' birthdays today are singer Johnny Cash, born in 1932. That's right. And I just wanted to say about Mr. Cash, when he sang Soundgarden's Rusty Cage off of the Legend of Johnny Cash CD, when he sang that, it brought me to tears. And for those of you that know anything about me at all, you know that I toured with Soundgarden in 1989, 1990, back in the day before they were Soundgarden. No, actually, as the meteoric rise started to kick off on their Louder Than Love tour. And, the way that he sang Rusty Cage, I'm just saying that it showed a side of Johnny Cash to our generation. That man had it all. Johnny Cash, 1932. Happy birthday, man. Let's see. Oh, another dead guy birthday today. Tony Randall. The Odd Couple. Had to throw that one in there, too. Tony Randall, born in 1920. All right. We got a great show lined up. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Everything, you know what it is. Fade to Black, Jimmy Church Radio, whatever, J Church. Go like, subscribe, follow, friend. Do what you'd like. Stay updated. We do everything here, and I say it nightly, but I do mean this. This show is done for you. The way that we have got everything set up at jimmychurchradio.com, we've tried to make it as interactive as possible. I want to hear from everybody. I want your emails. I want your tweets. I just want everything here, the forums on the website. The way that we've got it all set up is for you, because that's the way that I would have wanted it if I was you. that's the way the show is set up. You know, that's why I'm here. I am here because I just didn't get what I needed from all those other radio shows out there. It doesn't even matter what it is, what the subject matter is. And that's the way this is set up. So I hope that you are enjoying it. Uh-oh, I have left a window open. It's now closed. Okay, you can email throughout the show. And by the way, it's Jimmy at jimmychurchradio.com. Today is a big day here in the church family, I should say. We are buying my daughter, Deanna, her first car. And so we get the call today that the car just got delivered to the car dealership. And that's it. But I've got a show to do. So I've got to go to the studio. I've got to do my thing. You know, sitting in for our bell is a privilege. And right now it's messing with my life. In that I would like to be there tonight. So Deanna, enjoy your car. She's getting a Honda Sport, by the way, black on black with tinted windows. And I think back to my first car, a 1966 Rust Bucket Mustang that my dad bought for like $200. And I was happy. And that's not the way the world works these days, apparently, with kids, because she is driving a true sled. And anyway, I'm not there. Everybody is there tonight. It's like the big rollout. There's probably a bow on that car, and I'll just get to look at the pictures. And I'm here with you. All right? So, yeah, it's a big night. Tonight we're going to have open lines all night. I'm going to keep them open for Nick Redfern. If you'd like to call in and speak with Nick, you can do that, 323-825-5045. Shoot me emails, Jimmy at jimmychurchradio.com. You know the drill. Get them in here. And if they're good, I'll read them on the air. I always do. And if you want to get a question to Nick, you can do that through email as well, Jimmy at jimmychurchradio.com. All right, we've got a bunch of other stuff. Again, thank you to Doug Aldrich for the bumper music. We've got a couple of changes on the website over at jimmychurchradio.com. One of them is really cool, and that is Stan's blog. And you know, I look at the numbers on the website, by the way, and Stan's blog is probably the most visited page there. And, well, and it probably should be. But we have got Teotihuacan on his blog now, and it's complete with pictures. You've got to go and check that out. Stan's blog, jimmychurchradio.com. It's right there. It's easy to do. But it is amazing. And I spent quite a bit of time today as soon as our web people let me know that it was up. I didn't even select this one, by the way. This was done without me. I would have chosen this subject. But Teotihuacan. Go check it out, jimmychurchradio.com. All right, a couple of other things. I don't know if you heard the news, but Kepler, the satellite, has found, I think the number was 715 new planets. 715. So where did this number come from? How long did it take, and so forth? The article, the press release reads like they found 715 planets yesterday. No. That would have been just too much. But that's kind of the way the headline reads. But 715 new planets out there. And it was compiled, and they had to, run software programs over the last 2 years. But 715 new planets. 4 of them in the zone, the Goldilocks zone. 4. And this is my point. If we are looking, and we should, and we are, if we are looking in that direction, they're looking back in hours. Oh, yeah. And they've been doing it for a long, long time. Think about that. To just stop and even ponder that they are not is out of the question. Our little primitive selves have the ability to do what we are doing. And when I say primitive, we're stupid. Been burning gas, cars, electricity for 100 years. That's nothing. So you just know, they're looking back. And if they are looking back, they know we are here. And they've known for a long time. All right. What was I saying? Oh, yeah, John B. Wells. I wanted to comment a little bit on his departure. And I have, through a bunch of phone calls this week and emails, the subject, even though this happened, a couple of weeks ago, the subject of John B. Wells is out there. Everybody wants to talk about it and why the departure and what I thought about it. But this is my take, and my take is the opposite of everybody else's. Because I just look at this a little more logically, and it's this. When you are on a career path in your life, you're on a career path. You want to succeed, you want to move forward, you want to climb, you want to just get the word out, and I'm referring to broadcasting, obviously. And you want to move forward and move up and a larger audience and bigger demographics. You want all of that stuff. And as you make this climb, you need to be very aware of your surroundings every step of the way. And when you get to the position that JBW was in, and I'm referring to Saturday nights on that broadcast for Clear Channel, and you are in that position and you're racking numbers and people are listening to you, you know what you do? You know what you don't do? You don't rock the boat. You don't do it. John B. Wells was right there. He was standing on the edge of the cliff. I just posted this, by the way. Right there, man, reaching out with his foot, felt the edge of the cliff. He was right there. And he could have succeeded, that guy, and taken over and saved that show. But now he can't. And that is my point. He could have. And he's a smart guy. I look up to him. He's almost frighteningly smart. Some of his views I don't agree with. But he's deep and he's comprehensive. And he was right there. And he was smart enough to know that he had choices to make. And he made the wrong one. Because now his career is backwards. And I don't know if he will ever get it back. To be in the position that he is in now ain't right. But that's the position that he's in. And he made the choice. I'm stunned. I am shocked. And I just thought that JBW was a little smarter than that. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. KJCR on the Dark Matter Radio Network. When I come back, it's going to be Nick Redfern. Stay with us. Shoot us an email. Jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com. Phone lines are open. 323-825-5045. Be back right after this. Stay with us.
Way out here, we listen to Jimmy Church on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
Dark Matter.
Dark Matter. Dark Matter. Dark Matter. Dark Matter.
You're listening to Fade to Black
on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
¿Qué tal, mis amigos? Yo soy Mario Carson, el tiburón, y los invito para que escuchen a mi buen amigo Jimmy Church Radio. ¡Claro que sí!
Oi, oi, I'm Reese Evans. You're listening to Jimmy Church. This is Revolution. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution is on radio. Ciao.
Oh, yeah. Fade to black. Fade to black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church, KJCR, on the Dark Matter Radio Network. And again, sitting in for the great Art Bell is a privilege. It's not a right. But you know what it does do? It gives me the opportunity to have guests like Nick Redfern. Nick Redfern is the author of more than 30 books on UFOs, Bigfoot, lake monsters, the chupacabras, Hollywood scandal, including Monster Diary, Memoirs of a Monster Hunter, Celebrity Secrets, There's Something in the Woods, Contactees, Final Events, one of my favorites, The Real Men in Black, The NASA Conspiracies, Science Fiction Secrets, On the Trail of Saucer Spies, Strange Secrets, and with fellow Texas-based researcher and author Ken Gerhard, Monsters of Texas. Nick has appeared on more than 70 TV shows, including Fox News, the BBC's Out of This World, the Sci-Fi Channel's Proof Positive, the History Channel's Monster Quest, America's Book of Secrets, Ancient Aliens, and UFO Hunters. Also on National Geographic's Paranatural, and of course, he was on MSNBC's Countdown with Keith Olbermann. His latest work is For Nobody's Eyes Only, about vanishing government UFO files. I would like to welcome to the program right now, and I am honored, Mr. Nick Redfern. Nick, are you with us?
Hey, Jimmy. Yeah, I'm just about with you. I've got a dose of bronchitis right now, so I'm here in body, here in mind, and here partly in voice.
Well, you know what's funny is you had said to me, or sent me an email, Jimmy, I've got bronchitis, and I'm like, oh no, seriously. But the worst of it is over, right? So right now you just have a cough.
Yeah, I'm past all the like fever and swollen glands. I'm one of these who kind of, knock on wood, just sort of gets sick once a year with like a bad cold or whatever. And right now I got it, but I'm one of these who's kind of like, well, the show's got to go on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And the good news is, you know, you're coming through clear, and we can hear you. So that's the main part. Oh, okay, now we've got a lot. You know, the thing is. With you, Nick, I have any subject that is near and dear to me, I can cover with you, and that is, you know. So the conversation, as always, everybody is used to me saying we can go in any direction. We're just talking. We're in my living room. Let's just get comfortable, and whatever we find interesting, everybody else is going to find interesting, and it'll just be a great night. So we'll bear with your cough, and let's just rock this thing, okay?
All right, cool.
All right. Now you're in Dallas, but your accent is from somewhere else. Where were you born? Yeah,
I was born in central England in a county called the West Midlands, which is. And the nearest sort of big landmark was the city of Birmingham, or still is the city of Birmingham, which is about 120 miles north of London. And it's very sort of like a very industrial city, you know, a lot of factories and, you know, industrial car making, that kind of thing. And
isn't that where Judas Priest is from?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of bands from Birmingham.
Yeah.
Judas Judas Priest, actually their lead singer, Rob Halford, was from the same town as me, Walsall.
Did you hang out with Rob or anything? Did you know him?
No, I mean, they were like heavy metal, and I like punk music, and so they were completely the opposite. I was never into metal. I like punk, and like the Ramones and the Sex Pistols and that kind of stuff.
Right.
Long-haired guys playing endless guitar solos wasn't for me. I was like into spiky-haired guitar, spiky-hair guitar, and singing about anarchy and smash the state and whatever,
Well, I can't really continue with this interview without telling you that I work for Rob, and he's one of my best friends, but I worked for Rob for like 3 years. Mm-hmm. Yeah, great guy. And, he considers me an Anglophile, and I like, the dividing line. This is what's really curious. Most people don't understand the difference between the north and the south of England. There is
very different.
Very different.
Yeah, and I was kind of in the middle. But I'll tell you something that's really weird. My mum, she's dead now, but she actually used to know Ian Hill, the bass player out of Judas Priest, because she used to work at a car repair shop. And Ian used to bring his car in. He had, some flash car, and he used to bring it in for all its repairs. And the guy who owned the place, Brian, he did all the work on Ian Hill's car. So it's kind of strange that, in a roundabout way, I got a connection to Judas Priest, and you do as well.
Well, and this is the thing, and I'm sure you share this view. I mean, we're going to get off this subject immediately, but like I said, most people don't understand or have ever heard about, the north of England and the south. They just think that, and understandably so, that England is just alike. If you're from the north or the south or the east or the west, England is just England. If you're British, you're just Brit, and that is not the case. And
no, it's not. There's a lot of rivalry between north and south, and a lot of fun poking at each other. And you can actually go like a couple of towns away, and the accent is different. It's not like a state-by-state accent. I can go to a town, say 10 miles away, and somebody speaks, I can tell where they come from, and they pronounce some words different to me. And but yeah, where I grew up is a very industrial, working class area, and you got to have your wits about you, and a lot of pub fights on a Friday night, and getting into scrapes. But that's what's growing up in England's like.
Well, and I think that, and I'm just going to ask you this directly. Steve Jones was from there too, wasn't he? Yeah. Wasn't he?
No, actually, Steve Jones. No, they were all the Sex Pistols. They were all from London.
They were all from. I thought Steve Jones was from. Yeah. He was from London too. But
he lives over here.
Yeah. Well, actually, he's another bud. He's got a place here in Beverly Hills too. Yeah, he's on the radio here. But that one of the desires growing up there in Birmingham, I'm referring to my musician friends from there, that their goal in life was just to try to make enough money to get out of town, because it's so working class, if you know what I mean. It's just so industrial that they just felt kind of, that they were going to follow the footsteps of their parents, and they didn't want to do that. They just wanted to do whatever they could to go out and check out the world and not get stuck in Birmingham.
Well, I mean, I kind of agree with that from my perspective, in the sense that I wanted to do what I wanted to do in life. I didn't really know what it was when I was a kid or a teenager, but I knew I wanted to do, I didn't want to be answerable to some boss with a tie telling me to do this or do that,
Exactly.
But I didn't actually have a problem with the area. I kind of liked the sort of, the little streets and the back streets and the clubs and, the bars and the nightclubs and everything else. And, I actually kind of enjoyed that sort of dark inner city vibe, you know what I mean? It was, for me, it was kind of, it wasn't sort of dark and depressing. It was like, wondering what's around the next corner kind of thing.
Right. Well, this is the thing, and I'm so excited about finally getting a chance to talk to you. I mean, I've been a fan for years, but there's one thing about you, and I don't know if you're cognizant of this or if you realize this, but I'm sure that you must have thought about this. But that is this: you are a very visible guy, in that you've got a look to you that people, if they see you, oh yeah. You know what I mean? You don't have an everyday kind of face, if you know what I mean. But you have, you are on. You seem to be one of the go-to guys when somebody needs to talk about paranormal stuff, whether it's Bigfoot or UFOs or government conspiracies or Men in Black. You're very visible on television. You've got a lot of books out there, but you for your you're like the spokesman. Have you how do you feel about being thrust into that position?
Well, I guess I don't sort of look at it necessarily. I guess it's hard to look at it from the way people look at you. For me, I do what I do, and I write what I write, and if people like it, they like it, and if they don't, well, there's plenty of other people out there. I kind of have a more, I guess, like a simplistic approach. To sort of backtrack, when I left school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I wasn't the best. And this will sort of answer your question, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I left school. I wasn't a pretty good student. I didn't do much qualifications-wise, and didn't really graduate as it's called over here in the US, and no college, no university. I was a typical sort of late starter and left school, and what the hell am I going to do? I've got to earn beer money and whatever, and rent money, and I actually sort of just fell into like a bit of luck where there was a job going on a new magazine that was being launched in the area I was living at the time called Zero, and it was like a entertainment magazine for kids, like the teenagers, and it was going to cover music, fashion, music reviews, concert reviews, that kind of thing. And I thought, well, I'll go along for the interview, and just luck would have it, they took on like 7 or 8 young kids my age, like 16, 17, and it was great. I was getting paid to go and see bands play and do reviews, and I could wear what I like. I hate suits, I hate ties and shirts. I like sort of black T-shirts and skull T-shirts and jeans, whatever, and that hasn't changed. And so, a job where I could wear what I like and actually get paid to sort of see bands, it was great. And I kind of found I enjoyed writing, and over time, I kind of sort of, I guess you design your own kind of style, or you work into your own style. And they taught me for like 2 years in all the different aspects of writing and journalism, and how to get a hook on a story and draw the reader in, that kind of thing, and so that's what got me into it, and so in other words, the only other job I've had apart from that is like as a van driver and a forklift driver, which I did for a couple of years as well. So in other words, the only things I can really do work-wise are drive a forklift and write. And so in terms of your question, about how do you perceive yourself, it was really, there's not much else I can do. It was like, it wasn't sort of like a goal, this is what I'm going to be. It was like write or starve,
Was your family, your parents, were they into the paranormal and fringe subject matter?
They were a bit, and that's actually what got me into it, because my dad, my mum and dad, when I was about 6, took me on a week's holiday to Scotland, and we spent a day at Loch Ness, and my dad told me the story of the Loch Ness Monster, and kind of that age, when you're 5 or 6, you don't sort of really think of it as like a mystery one day you're going to investigate. It was more kind of like monsters in the closet or under the bed. It was that sort of thing. And but I never sort of forgot that first trip I made to Loch Ness, and then as I got older, I started reading books on the subject and UFOs, and this was sort of mid-late 70s, and when I was sort of like 12, 13, 11, something like that, and I was reading like John Keel and Brad Steiger's books back then, and then as I got older, began reading more, and then thought, after I got this job on the Zero magazine, I thought, well, why not try and combine the two and start doing a bit of paranormal writing? And there were a couple of magazines around the time that I wrote for, and then it kind of expanded from there, sort of just following every lead, kind of like a band, band's got to keep getting gigs and getting visible and known, and that's what I did. I like to think I have sort of a good work ethic in terms of, it's not just work. You've got to have a deep passion for what I write about. You've got to have that. But also, you've got to be able to get the word out and the story out and market it. And And that's you just cut your teeth learning how to do that, you know.
Well, the first it's interesting you brought up the Loch Ness monster. I've got a bunch of emails, but the first one that just came in, I go in order, but the first one that just came in is, what is your take on the Loch Ness monster?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, the first thing is, of course, the name. You know, there isn't actually just one monster. You know, sightings have gone on for actually like centuries, like more than 1,000 years. So clearly there have to be a colony of these creatures. Now, I actually do believe there are unknown animals in Loch Ness. And, you know, Loch Ness is a very large body of water. It's like 22 miles long, a mile wide, and about 800 feet deep. So it's a large body of water. It's actually the biggest interior body of water in the entire British Isles.
When you're at one end of Loch Ness, can you see the other end? You can't, can you? It's 22 miles away. No. It's like over the horizon.
Miles, and and it's like, although it's sort of fairly straight, it does twist and turn a bit. So no, you cannot see sort of one end from the other. But 22 miles is a long body of water. Now, there are a lot of theories as to what these creatures are. Certainly, the one that the Scottish Tourist Board loves to promote is the idea that they're plesiosaurs, surviving marine reptiles from the same era as the dinosaurs. And although that's a great scenario, and it'd be wonderful if they are, personally, I don't think they are plesiosaurs. For example, plesiosaurs lived in the oceans, which is salt water, and Loch Ness is fresh water. Now, there are some creatures like crocodiles, which can adapt from fresh water to salt water, but we don't have any evidence that plesiosaurs did. Plesiosaurs as well, sort of 15, 20, 25 feet long, they were purely meat eaters, and one of the big questions that's been asked is whether or not there's a regular enough fish population in Loch Ness to support like a colony of 15 or 20 25-foot long animals, enough fish every single day. And often, or in the most part, every year we don't get that many reports. So in other words, these creatures aren't surfacing that often. Being reptiles, plesiosaurs would have to surface for oxygen. So if they were like taking their oxygen from the air, they would have to be seen more often than they are. The fact that we don't get many reports every year suggests they derive their oxygen like fish through gills underwater. So they're clearly not plesiosaurs in my view. And one of the interesting theories is that they could be some sort of giant type of mutated eel. Most eels, like conger eels, they can grow up to like sort of 10, 12, 15 feet. But, if you're dealing with like a 30 to 40 foot long eel, and you saw that barreling towards you, you're probably not going to quibble if that's a monster or not.
Right,
and it might not be as kind of exciting as a plesiosaur, but it would still be like an amazing biological discovery. Or the other alternative, which I think is actually more likely, is it's a type of creature we just have not classified yet. We just don't know what it is. It's still under the radar.
Did your dad believe in it when he told you the story? Did he? Because that would influence you. Did he say, "Hey,
Well, he kind of told it me. I guess how you would tell a kid like a spooky little story. But I mean, he's still alive. He still remembers to this day. When we sat there on the shores of Loch Ness and told me this story. But I think, I can say for sure, my dad is open to a lot of mysteries. But he's somebody who's like a practical person, and he likes to see evidence, but he's not a skeptic or a debunker. He finds the UFO thing fascinating, but I think he'd like to see something for himself. I guess as we all would,
Right.
But he was involved in an incident in the 50s when he was in the Royal Air Force. He worked on radar, and he was a radar mechanic. But some of the radar tracking guys actually occasionally track weird stuff, and he was sort of on the periphery of the story because he was part of the radar mechanic team that had to sort of check out the equipment. So, in other words, he's had like a few little tangential links here and there, which sort of keeps him interested in it all, even to this day.
Did he share any crazy stories with the family, UFO-wise?
Well, mainly the stories were from the 50s when he was. This is when Britain had what was called national service, which is was the British equivalent of the draft, but it finished in about 1960, I think, something like that. And but the base he was at, RAF Neatishead, Royal Air Force Neatishead, was on the east coast of England, and that was sort of at the forefront of if the Russians ever launched a sneak attack. it would be at the forefront of launching a counterattack. And so they were always on sort of highly visible standby in case, the Russians did try something. And on several occasions, they tracked very high-flying, fast-flying objects, which clearly weren't anything that the Russians or the British or America had at the time, performing all sorts of weird maneuvers and flying rings around the aircraft that were scrambled to try and intercept them. And my dad remembered this occurred on like 3 occasions in which he was in the service, and everybody was told, you won't talk about this, just forget about it, it's just one of those things. But they never kind of really explained what one of those things is, And my dad didn't tell me till I was about 13. This was like 30 plus years, 33, 34 years after it actually happened. But again, like that, he's never forgotten about it. And what I actually think probably that it was the UFO experience that probably drove him to sort of, watch TV shows on other paranormal mysteries, because he knew, he had an awareness that there was weird stuff out there.
I'm gonna. We have, only so much time, but like I said at the beginning of the interview, we can talk on so many different subjects, and I almost don't know where to start. But I'm going to. I want to talk about Men in Black, and not only about your book and what is in the book, but to me the subject of Men in Black is it's either real or it isn't, but I'm on the real side, so just so you understand what side of the fence I am on. But either it's a modern phenomena in that what we are seeing today, and I'm referring from, the 1947 onward kind of thing, that magical date. Or it's something that's been going on for centuries, and it's related to a lot of other things and not just UFOs. But let's talk about the modern era. When was the first Men in Black reference in modern times?
Well, yeah, this is sort of an awkward, controversial area, because I actually agree with you that it's an old phenomenon, but I'll explain why there are actually like a delineating point. Is that, the whole sort of modern era of ufology kicked off in 1947 with Kenneth Arnold's sighting over Washington State. Now, what happened was that in the immediate years afterwards, government agencies like the FBI and Air Force Intelligence, who a lot of the guys were plain clothes, they would go out and interview UFO witnesses at times. And of course, the way the guys dressed back then was like dark suits, ties, and fedora-type hats. And that's how the Men in Black were reported. So it gets kind of confusing, because I think in the very early days, the early reports of so-called Men in Black were actually legitimate visits where Air Force and FBI people had gone out, and the person who was interviewed might have felt threatened or intimidated, and so it kind of created one angle of the MIB. But in saying that, in the early 50s, you had like another angle surface, and this related to sort of far creepier and weirder Men in Black. And it all began with a guy named Albert Bender, who lived in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And he established in 1952 a UFO research group called the International Flying Saucer Bureau. And in no time at all, the IFSB sort of grew to massive proportions, and people were subscribing to it from all over the world. It had thousands, literally, of subscribers. And Bender was a bit of a weird guy. He had obsessive-compulsive disorder, and he lived in the attic of an old house that looked straight out of, like, Psycho, like Norman Bates' house, which he lived in with his dead mother, and that was kind of how Bender's house was. So he was into a lot of weird paranormal stuff in the real world, like non-fiction paranormal, Ouija boards and stuff like that. But he was heavily into like H.P. Lovecraft and horror fiction and UFOs. And Bender ran this group for about 18 months, and then suddenly shut it down without warning. And he just gave a few sort of brief allusions to friends that he'd been silenced by these 3 guys. And the story finally came tumbling out that over the course of the time that the IFSB existed, Bender had these run-ins with these weird Men in Black. And, you know, if you think of the Men in Black, a lot of people think of the movies like Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, government agents.
Mm-hmm.
But Bender's Men in Black were nothing like this. They were kind of like something that stepped straight out of H.P. Lovecraft or some ancient vampire story. They were kind of like 5 feet to 5 feet 5 tall, sort of ultra skinny, pale, anemic, and anorexic looking. These bulging eyes, sometimes glowing eyes, and they wore these sort of almost too skinny suits and fedoras, and sometimes long trench coat kind of overcoats. And they would literally materialize in his house. And when I say materialize, I don't mean knock on the door and come in. I mean sort of shadowy kind of materialize, not unlike today's so-called shadow people that people see. And Bender was petrified out of his wits and just dropped the subject and left it behind. He just briefly surfaced in the early 60s to put the record straight with a book of his own as to what happened, but then left again, and then has never, ever come back to the subject. And so Bender kind of coined this new version of the MIB. Now, I've written 2 books on the subject, and I've got a 3rd one coming out soon, because there's so much information. Of course, when you write a book, people contact me with their experiences, and I get probably, even to this day, I would say on average, somewhere in the region of a Man in Black report, a new report, about every 3 weeks. And a good 99.9% of the reports are of these vampire-looking MIB, not the government agent types at all.
Right.
So, but in saying that, and now this sort of jumps back to what you said about the earlier times, you can find a lot of stories where there seems to be tie-ins with other paranormal phenomena in the MIB, going back a long way. For example, a lot of stories of ancient alchemists, alchemy being the sort of the ancient secrets of turning base metals into precious metals, as they're known. You know, sort of turning tin into gold or whatever, using these alchemical, magical rites.
Right.
And there are stories about alchemists being visited by guys who arrive late at night on black horses, dressed in black cloaks, warning people to keep away from the subject of alchemy. And I've got a lot of reports on file where people today have been investigating or dabbling with Ouija boards and the occult and paranormal and black magic. No UFO angle at all, but they've been visited by these sort of weird-looking MIB as well. So, in answer to your question, there is an old and a new phenomenon, but they are interlinked. But the MIB mystery actually spreads far, spreads far beyond just UFOs. It seems to cover a lot of different realms of the of the paranormal as well.
With the modern MIBs, the one of the more fascinating angles is the brand new looking fresh antique car, right? That looks like it just came off the showroom floor, but it's from 1935 or 1940 or a 1965 black Lincoln, but it looked brand new. With the old stories, did they ever arrive in a black carriage? You know that. You know what I mean? Is that connection there too as well?
Yeah, they actually did. There are a few reports on file where in the 17 and 1800s that there were people dabbling in witchcraft, and the devil supposedly turned up in a black carriage pulled by like 4 black horses late at night. And there's actually a report from the north of England in, I think, around about 1910, when like 3 guys in black suits turned up in like one of the very early type of cars, 1910, sort of just after Henry Ford started bringing cars out, who turned up in an old black car and asked if anybody had seen any like wet balloons, like the early airships flying over. And when the people in this little village said no, they just got back in the car and drove off. But, this was sort of an early 1910 type era car, one of the very first ones. But with the car angle, is kind of stands out as much as the MIB and their clothing does. Even today, they're reported in, like you said, these old style cars where you'd expect to see a bunch of gangsters like Bugsy Malone or Al Capone stepping out of them, all kind of like 50s ones with like the shark fin tails, so like a cool looking black car. We expect to have like the white wheels, except it has black wheels. So they look like that, and that's the odd thing about the Men in Black. You would imagine that if they're going around threatening people, they'd want to blend in, not stand out, but they actually stand out even more because of the way they look and the fact that they're driving what essentially look like antique cars.
There, to my knowledge, and I've gotten into this subject about as deep as I can with what little information is out there. I have only seen 2 photographs of the Men in Black over the years, and I know you know both photographs. The one back in the I think it's in the 1940s, 1950s, where he's standing up against the side, in like a doorway on the left side of the shot. There's that one, and then the one that just surfaced just recently of the 2 Men in Black going through the hotel lobby, right?
Oh yeah.
Now, aside from those 2, are there any photographs that you know of that are out there, or maybe something that you're holding back and not sharing with us?
Nothing I'm holding back, but I do know, I am aware of one more, which a guy named Alan Greenfield took. He's actually reproduced in my Real Men in Black book. And the other one you're talking about, in the doorway, that's actually taken by a friend of mine, Jim Mosley. He's now deceased, but it was taken by Jim Mosley while another friend of mine, Tim Beckley, was actually driving the car. And this was back in the 1960s, and it was in Jersey City.
Right.
Yeah, it was in Jersey City. And what happened was there was a UFO research couple, Jack and Mary Robinson, and they had these experiences, like over the course of 4 or 5 days, where this creepy-looking MIB would stand in the doorway of the recess of the building opposite their apartment complex, just kind of staring enigmatically up at the window where Jack and Mary lived. And, of course, they were actually like the main UFO researchers in Jersey City, and Jack had a day job, so Mary was at home all day, and she got sort of really worried and paranoid because this guy was just stood there. And so she phoned Jim Mosley, who in turn phoned Tim Beckley, and they're like, well, they'd all got reports of MIB before, but the MIB never seemed to be in one place twice, whereas this one was. So Jim basically said to Tim, well, he's been there 4 days. Why don't we go over early tomorrow morning, see if we can catch him in the act? So they drove over Jim drove over to Tim, or vice versa, and picked him up. They drove over to Jersey City. And sure enough, right opposite Mary's apartment was this guy standing in the doorway. And it kind of sounds strange to say it looked creepy, but he actually does look creepy. He's just sort of, you can tell he's just kind of standing there almost like zombified, if you like. He's got like the classic fedora on, the sunglasses, a long coat, and he looks totally out of place. He's like a shop window dummy, just somebody's position there.
That's right.
And so Jim quickly snapped off a quick picture, and they drove around the block. This was like 8:30 in the morning to try and find a parking space. And by the time they got round the block again, he'd gone. But fortunately, they captured him on film, and that's sort of one of the more interesting pieces of imagery, if you like, of the Men in Black, and one of the very few. As I said, I'm aware of a few pictures, but that one for me is one that really kind of stands out.
Yeah, it stands out for me too as well. Were they able to? Did he ever show back up? Did anybody ever get a chance to try to approach this this MIB?
No, that was the interesting thing, was that he'd been there sort of 4 days running, and on the very day that Jim took the picture, that was the last day he turned up. But it kind of really sort of shook up both Jack and Mary Robinson because of the fact that he had been there for so long, and they felt really intimidated by it, which is actually sort of the main goal of the MIB.
It's the job.
And intimidate people. Yeah.
Did Jack and Mary ever see this guy again, or another Men in Black type?
No, they actually didn't at their apartment, but they were involved. They were at a conference in the following year where the guy I mentioned earlier, Alan Greenfield, also took a picture of a man in black, actually at quite close quarters. And although they didn't see him, they were at the same conference, so that was kind of a tie-in there as well.
Yeah, I've heard about that picture, but I've never seen it. Have you seen that one?
Yes, I have. That's also in my Real Men in Black book. He's actually much closer. And I interviewed Alan for the book, Alan Greenfield, and Alan told me how he went out into the street because he saw this guy lurking there. He had a suit on, hat and glasses. And Alan said the guy just sort of... Alan had a chance to take a photograph of him, but then the guy sort of turned on his tail and walked off. And Alan chased him, and he said he was no more than maybe 10 feet in front of him as he turned a corner. And as Alan went round the corner, he was literally gone. You know, he said there was just nowhere for him to hide. There was maybe a lamppost, but there was no way you could hide behind like a skinny lamppost. No cars to hide behind, nothing. He just vanished. And that's what led Alan to believe he wasn't just some guy dressed in a black suit. You know, he was a man in black. And they do seem to have this weird knack of being able to sort of outwit and avoid people and just vanish into nothing when they realize somebody's on their tail.
I'll tell you a real funny story. Back when I first started this show, I went to a UFO conference here. I'm not going to say which one because what I did was wrong, but I just wanted to go out and cop a vibe. I go to conferences all the time, but I go as myself. Okay? Everybody knows who I am or not. It doesn't matter. But so I show up at this conference, and I wear a black suit with a black tie, white shirt, and I stand at the back, and I don't speak to anybody. All I do is talk on my cell phone and watch. And I'm here to tell you, there was 250 people in front of me freaking out. It went on forever. Everybody looking over their shoulder, checking me out, looking over there, whispering to each other, walking by me, you know, just, and people are aware, you know, and if you ever want to, I'm serious, you ever want to freak anybody out, have one of your buddies wear a black suit to a UFO conference and stand in the back. Just, it's amazing. Because
I guess that kind of, you know, that demonstrates how much the Men in Black sort of motif has sort of, you know, made its way into the UFO field.
And for myself included, I am very aware. And and let's get to this that modern the shot that was just taken in the hotel lobby. Yeah. I've heard so many different stories behind it. What's the general story, and what do you know about that picture? Where was it taken?
I think it was somewhere in Seattle, if I remember right. But I really don't know anything about it any more than anyone else does. That it was supposedly like a security camera picture, and I've heard things that it was like actually like a viral marketing thing, and then somebody else said it was just a straightforward hoax and just, you know, posted anonymously on the internet, and then somebody else picked up on the story and kind of grabbed it and embroidered on it. So, you know, it's one of these that. The problem is it doesn't have sort of definitive provenance in terms of we know who took it and what the circumstances were, which is very different to like with Alan Greenfield and Tim Beckley.
Right.
We know for sure because we got the background and everything else. So, you know, that one, it's interesting, but it's almost, when you look, it's almost too good to be true.
Exactly. Well, you know, and back to my point, I've heard so many different stories about that picture, and it is about as creepy as it gets. When you look at it, and you're like, you know, and then when you hear, I mean, it's a creepy picture on its own, and then when you hear the Men in Black tied into it, and you're looking at it, you're like, holy crap, this is really cool. And you know, I've heard so many different stories, and I would like for more information, like you said, provenance. If we could just get that, and it's just not there. So
no, it's but that doesn't mean it's not an interesting picture. But
well, yeah,
we just need to tread carefully, you know.
Okay, now here's the direct question: are the Men in Black the UFO Men in Black that turn up after every sighting and put pressure on people? Men in Black. Is that real or urban legend?
No, that's not an urban legend. And like I said, I get probably a report around about every 2 to 3 weeks. And I've got literally hundreds of stories of people from all walks of society who've had experiences with the Men in Black. And a good 80% involve UFOs, 20% it's sort of other aspects of the paranormal, and they've got the visit under those circumstances. But it's the typical thing where the MIB turn up late at night, you know, knock on the door sort of 11 o'clock, midnight. You know, most people would think, well, who the hell's that knocking on the door? You know, you probably wouldn't open the door. You'd at least look through the keyhole, through the spy hole,
right,
and see who they were. You know, is it the police with bad news? That might be your first thought. But it's almost like the MIB have the ability to take over people's common sense factors or their mind even. because people very often just open the door and let them in, and the MIB come in, or they get invited in, I should say. They sit down and they start reeling off all these questions and vague threats and so on, and the person answers the questions, and then when the MIB are finished, they get up and leave. And it's like 5 or 10 minutes after that the person's common sense factors come back. It's like almost as if they've been subjected to like a hypnotic suggestion, or somebody slipped something in the drink.
To let their guard down?
Yeah, to where, but it's like where it wears off quickly. Like you come round from anaesthetic after having a tooth out or whatever, that kind of thing. And most of the people I've spoken to, sometimes they're happy to have the stories used, sometimes they prefer it with a pseudonym, other times they're like, I want to tell you the story, but please don't ever use it. In other words, they're not looking for anything, they just want to know what happened. And, I mean, I've got reports from Canada, America, England, Scotland, Australia, South America, all over the place. And for the most part, they're all of these sort of skinny, vampire-looking MIB. And a lot of the times, obviously people don't know each other, but there's sort of subtle little issues that crop up, in so many cases, that parallels and things like that, where it's clear they're seeing the same phenomenon, but across decades and whatever.
There's another aspect that kind of scares me, and those are the stories about the men in black that don't speak, that don't say anything at all. Where they come in and they're just staring, and is that is it some type of pressure to just scare somebody into silence?
Well, I actually think that is it. I mean, I've got some cases on record where the men in black will come in either 2s or 3s, and one will do all the talking, and the other one will just kind of literally just sit staring, kind of like the look a dog has when it's about to attack you. If you don't know the dog, you lean over it, the dog's eyes go wide, and you sort of pull back.
Right.
It's sort of like that. That's actually how one of the witnesses described it. This other MIB was talking in like a monotone, robotic-type voice, and the other one was just sort of sat there in his fedora and trench coat, eyes not blinking, but just, when you can see somebody out the corner of your eye watching, it was like that. In like the entire 20-minute interview or Q&A, this one did not take his eyes off the interviewee, just sat there rigid, just glaring as if he, eyes filled with just pure hate, looking at this person.
Well, you know what they say, it's the quiet ones you got to watch out for.
There you go, exactly. Maybe that's where the phrase came from.
It just might be. Oh, so what about the reference? I'm not sure. I had Ann Druffel on last week.
Oh, yeah.
And Ann told us the story about her friend Rex Heflin and those photographs. And and the reference that he made, because back then, I don't know if the urban legend or myth of Men in Black was as prevalent as it is today. But back then, immediately after he took these pics, they showed up at his door. And his story is about as crazy as it gets, where, he coughed up the photographs. You know what I mean? What do you think about, are you familiar with Rex Heflin's account with Men in Black?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is that when you talk about, how known was the folklore and the legend and whatever, it was known deeply within the UFO field at the time, but the difference today was that it wasn't widespread known amongst the general public. Everybody knows of the Men in Black phenomenon from the movies. There's probably nobody in the civilized world who hasn't today heard of the Men in Black. But back then, it was just the UFO community that had heard of them. They got a lot of mentions in books at the time, but it didn't sort of extend out of the 5,000 or 10,000 people that bought the books.
Exactly.
Heflin's case is an interesting one because he's got these photographs from the 60s over California of these strange object looking like a squash top hat almost, flying very close proximity and very clear pictures. And reportedly, as you said, got this sort of weird visit from these guys who essentially demanded the imagery. And what's interesting is that if you look at the time frame, under the Freedom of Information Act, the FBI and the Air Force have both released documents showing that actually just within a year or so, within months of Heflin's sighting, they circulated memos saying that, hey, something to the effect of, hey, there are people going around the United States threatening our citizens, claiming to be FBI agents or Air Force personnel in black suits, and we want to find out who they are. And when you look at the time frame, it seems to be that they were responding particularly to the Heflin case.
Right.
That was the one that sort of tipped the scale, so to speak, in making the Air Force and the FBI realize that, hey, somebody really is going around masquerading as us and silencing people. But when you read the documents, ironically, you realize it's actually not the government, because the government was asking in all these internal memos, which were top secret back then, they were asking, who the hell are the men in black? So and I actually think we've got the Heflin case in part to thank for the government being spurred on to sort of address and look into the entire MIB mystery.
Yeah, and with Heflin, and I spent a lot of time on this subject last week with Ann, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it again tonight. But the thing about the Heflin case for me is, here is a guy with no axe to grind, as clearly just a working class guy as you are ever going to get, who never wanted fame, fortune, none of that. That was never his agenda. As a matter of fact, he gave those photographs up. Yep. And Ann Druffel has those photographs. She has the originals today. She has them locked away, which blew my mind last week when she said, "Yeah, well, Jimmy, I've got them locked in a box here at the house. And if you ever want to see them," she literally, seriously, Nick said, "if you ever want to come by, I would love to show them to you." That just, that just floored me. But anyway, back to Heflin. The way that the photographs were taken, the way that he brought everything out, and the way he, told everybody, his coworkers, his family, and then the visit with the men in black, all of this, he didn't know anything about anything. And for him to have how do I say this correctly? All of the perfect things to say, and the photograph, and the events, and the follow-up, and the men in black, it all was just like your classic case. And, the photographs are perfect. The story always held water, and to me, it's one of the cases, we have only a handful in history that we can look at and go, okay, there is something to this. And the Heflin case is that in spades.
No, it's a very good one. It's a classic one. And but in saying that, in fairness, because I do get a lot of reports, I do know that there's a massive number of very credible cases, but a lot of people don't want to publicize. But in terms of the ones that are publicly visible, the Heflin one, is sort of in the top 10 of classics, so to speak.
Now, one of your books, the NASA Conspiracies, I am going to, we have planned in the future here very soon, so I want to talk about it now, but are some very specific NASA things. And one of them is, did we really go to the moon? Okay. Now, the more that I research this subject, now I'm a child of the 60s and 70s. I'm very proud of my country and the things that we have achieved. I'm very proud. But the more that I find out about Apollo, the more that I have to take a step back and just wonder that is it possible that maybe it was a hoax? What do you think?
Well, my personal opinion, I have to differ. I think we did go to the moon. I think the moon landings did occur. I'll tell you a couple of reasons why. Ones that often people don't think of. One is the fact that, certainly of the 60s and probably the 20th century, the moon landing was the most famous, definitive technological achievements, of the modern era. There's no doubt about that. Putting a human being or human beings on another world. Granted, it was quite close to us, only 250,000 miles.
Right.
But, these are major technical achievements. And if it was a hoax, then the backlash and the loss of morale that it would have caused the U.S. population if it was proved to have been a hoax would have been, America probably wouldn't have, certainly the American political system, I think, would never have recovered from it. People would just view everything cynically and would not believe a thing. And I'm sure it would have brought down the government and, just could have even led to like a mini revolution, where just people wanting the total change.
Well,
now, the reason I mention that as a build-up is because one of the things we know is that the Russians were monitoring all the communications between NASA headquarters and the Apollo 11 mission. And they, the Russians were deeply jealous of the fact that America were about to trump them to land on the moon. So in other words, because the Russians were monitoring the flight, if they had any inkling that the signals from the Apollo mission weren't coming from, 250,000 miles away, but were coming from somewhere in the desert,
right.
I think there'd be no reason why the Russians wouldn't have said that, because it would have destroyed U.S. morale. And so for the Russians to remain quiet if they had proof makes no sense. And, of course, the other issue that there are some photographs, but again, people said, well, they could be doctored, that do seem to show, granted they're not up close, but they do seem to show the evidence of the moon landings taken from above the moon, just a few years ago, where you can see the tracks of the lunar lander, etc., and things like this, and the lunar car that they had. And that might seem strange that people think, well, those tracks couldn't still be there, but the reason they are is because the moon is a vacuum. There's no wind, there's no air, there's nothing. So there's nothing to move anything around on the surface. And so for that, there are a number of reasons like that. And
okay, well, let's debate.
We went.
Then let's debate this issue for a second, okay? Let's very politely, but there are a couple of things.
I don't care.
Okay. But is this because now, like I started this off with, I am proud of everything that we have achieved. Totally, okay, I get that, but there are some compelling evidence that is very presentable from another position in a debate. So let's just say this. You and I are sitting in class. A teacher says, okay, you're going to say we went to the moon. You're going to say we didn't, and let's go. That's my position. Okay, so I'm just saying. I'm going to take the position, and let's debate this. And the first thing I'm going to say is we just didn't have the technology to go to the moon. We just there's just no way that we went from nothing just a few decades before, barely flying airplanes, to just 30, 40, 50 years later, just a handful of time to having the technology to putting ourselves on the moon. It was an impossibility. There's no way that we had the technology to get there.
Well, I mean, my response to that would be, when the huge Apollo 11 rocket took off, the world's cameras and telescopes even were on it. And it was tracked as far as it could, it was visibly tracked as far as it could be visibly tracked by a telescope and camera, well out of the Earth's atmosphere. So, even if you say we didn't go to the moon, certainly the rocket went to the moon's orbit, because it was watched, via powerful telescopes, on its way to the moon. So, even if you take out the equation that we didn't necessarily land on the moon, certainly the rocket went up, went towards the moon. It didn't sort of just do a loop round and, the rocket come down in one piece in the ocean or anything like that. It was tracked and seen visually on its way there. But, that actually is one of the interesting points that people do make, the sudden jump, if you like, from Sputnik in 57 with the Russians to 12 years later to actually putting people on the moon. And
it's one thing to
getting them back as well.
Yeah, it's one thing to put a satellite up. Okay, that seems an easy thing to do. We've all launched rockets out of our backyard. So to shoot something up into the atmosphere and get it into orbit, a low Earth orbit, that's one thing. But it's another thing for survivability of radiation on the moon, solar flares, the Van Allen belts. You know, the capsule wasn't lined with lead. You know, it's paper thin aluminum or whatever they built it out of. There's no protection for radiation, not only going through the Van Allen belt, but once you get to the moon, you're dancing around on the surface of the moon in loincloth. You know, that wasn't a lead-lined spacesuit. It's just linen. You know, so there's that aspect too, that the survivability of the radiation is the other thing that it just causes me to just have pause, where this argument does actually hold water. There isn't any argument against that. I mean, you know, there was no protection for the radiation.
No, you're right on that point. And, you know, I wouldn't want people to think I'm sort of, although I think we did go, you know, I think that there are questions that, I think the big problem is that, you know, we need to have everybody needs to sit down on both sides and have experts brought in who can explain this or not explain this and say, yeah, this is a problem. I mean, for example, some of the photographs, even I, who think we did go to the moon, even I think some of the photographs are odd because they seem to show extra illumination on the moon beyond just the light from the sun or, you know, or from the camera itself. It's almost look like they look too staged, too good. And that's sort of given rise to the idea, well, what if we did go, but the pictures didn't come out and they were forced to recreate them? Or, you know, that there actually was other lighting because it was all in a studio.
Well,
but even I have to admit that some of the pictures do look way too good.
They're way perfect. And this is one of the fascinating things. You know, back in the days of film cameras, which you remember, our children today don't. They don't have a clue. But back in the day, if you had any issues with your film, you just got crappy pictures. It was too humid outside. It was too cold. It was too sunny. It was overcast. Whatever. But you know, you were constantly combating the issue of trying to get a good picture. But yet they can go to the moon where it's 200 degrees or it's minus 200 degrees, full of radiation, but every picture came out perfect. You know, we never, you know, that's another issue. I totally agree with you on that. But how about this one? This is the other great debate. How come we never went back? How come the Russians never went? And how come nobody else has taken a crack at it?
Well, you know, I mean...
It's been 40 years, you know. It's been 40 years.
Well, I kind of take a bit of a cynical approach to it all. I think, you know, it was kind of like it was a big thing when it all happened, and then, to an extent at least, it was like the whole excitement was over. And I think what happened was that NASA made a mistake in not really pushing and galvanizing and getting everybody else behind it to put a small outpost on the moon and then a plan to get people to Mars. And it's kind of, I mean, there's another angle I can bring up as well, but it's kind of like today with the space shuttle being shut down, and now, you know, if America wants to send astronauts into space, it's got to ask nicely of the Russians, you know, can you please take us up to the International Space Station?
Exactly.
Which is kind of crazy.
Right.
But I kind of look at the bigger picture that, you know, it's almost like in today's society, the sort of latest generations just don't care. You know, kids don't care. You know, it's kind of like when Watergate happened. You know, President Nixon was forced to retire for bugging the White House and the Democratic Party. Well, the entire nation is bugged today by the NSA. Nobody cares. Kids just want to sit in the bedroom and play their iPods or iPhones or whatever, you know. And I think there's that aspect. You know, there's 40 years ago, people thought we'd be on Mars by now or whatever. I think what's happened is that, in many respects, advancement and the aspiration for advancement has stagnated. You know, now this is the lead up to all of my NASA conspiracy questions. I just wanted to set the stage
right there. Because if there's a conspiracy at NASA, certainly that would be the biggest one, that the moon landings were a hoax. I don't know how it would be possible, and this is the flip side of the debate. I don't know how it would be possible to get 300,000-400,000 people in on that conspiracy, because that's how many people that were involved in the Apollo program. If they were able to whittle it down to just having a handful of people knowing that it was a hoax, then we have a real conspiracy where NASA can pretty much do whatever they want, if they can pull that off. Now, let's...
Well, yeah. No, you're right. And I mean, that's one of the other reasons why I think we did go, because, you're right. The number of people who were involved in the NASA, the moon landing, was literally six figures. We're not exaggerating there. And I think, the fact that we don't have anybody really come forward to say, hey, I was the third cameraman in the hangar that filmed the Neil Armstrong walk down the ladder.
Right.
That hasn't happened. It's kind of like with Roswell. We've had dozens of people come forward who we can prove are at the base and who said they saw alien bodies and so on. We don't have the first cameraman or the second cameraman on the first mission to the moon or the second. We don't have the person who found the location where they decided to do the shoot. Nobody's come forward. And I just, human nature, it's kind of like the Edward Snowden thing. That came tumbling out. Watergate did. Iran-Contra, Monica Lewinsky. And yet something that small can tumble out, and yet 200,000 people are silenced forever on something as big as the moon landings. So that's one of the reasons, again, why I think we did go, just the sheer logistics of trying to keep something of such a magnitude hidden forever.
Now, what about the other conspiracies with NASA, of which, we could literally keep counting on every hand of everybody in the room the amount of conspiracies that are tied to NASA. So I don't know where to start, but I'll start here. Have they been holding back with all of the STS footage? And what is the story behind that? And in the NASA footage that is out, that accidentally or whatever is out, is that real, or are they allowing that footage out just to misrepresent on what they are holding or keeping from us?
Well, again, I have to sort of play devil's advocate. I've got to be honest. A lot of this sort of FTS space shuttle type footage with things going past the window of the space shuttle and whatever, I've got to be honest, I'm not overly impressed with a lot of that. When you look at it, are you looking at a large objects at a distance or smaller objects close up? And when I've looked at sort of legitimate pictures of debris and things like that, going back much longer, when you can tell it is, if you try and focus your eye on thinking it's a close-up object, it actually doesn't look that much different. Now, there might be people thinking that, Nick's been bought off, to say I haven't, but I genuinely believe there are UFOs, there's a cover-up, but I just, I'm not massively impressed by a lot of that footage. Now, granted, like some of the Jack Kasher research in the early 1990s was really intriguing, and particularly that one famous shot where something shoots across the sky, then it looks like some sort of laser-guided weapon or something tries to intercept it. That's kind of an interesting one. But I think a lot of it is, sort of almost seeing faces in clouds, that kind of thing. And but, as I said, I'm a full-on believer in the UFO phenomenon, so I'm quite happy to be proven otherwise. And I hope I can be. It's just that, I'm not impressed with a lot of that, unfortunately.
Who was, just really quick, his name escapes me right now, but the gentleman from Great Britain who was the computer guy that downloaded the NASA photographs out of Florida.
Oh, Gary McKinnon.
Yeah, Gary McKinnon. Yeah. I'm sorry for not remembering his name. I'm fascinated with that case. What about his story and the way that not only the British government, backed him, blocked him from getting, deported and extradited to the United States so we could bring charges against him for that. Have you talked to Gary? And
No, I don't know him, but I know his story. And You know, I mean, you can look at McKinnon's story from two ways. I mean, first and foremost, I mean, regardless of what he saw, what he found, and the entire thing, from my perspective, I think the guy's an idiot, I have to say, because if you think you can get away with hacking into somebody's computer system when it's like somebody's Department of Defense or a high-level government agency in today's world and get away with it, you know, you're insane. It's not going to happen, you know, and so to even do it in the first place was ridiculous. And, you know, I don't recommend anyone ever does anything like that at all. You're just asking for, you know, major headaches for the rest of your life. So, but with that said, you know, McKinnon did what he did and claimed to have seen like a photograph, like I think like a multi megabyte photograph or something that seemed to show an unknown object in space. It didn't seem to be one of our spacecraft. And he also claimed to have seen a list of what were described as non-terrestrial officers, and they were sort of like captain this and flight lieutenant this or whatever. But that very name, non-terrestrial officers, made McKinnon think that it was like some sort of secret space program, not necessarily even one of NASA's, but possibly like a military space program that NASA may have known nothing about, but kind of was flying clandestinely back to the moon, you know, and to Mars and who knows where else, you know, with highly sophisticated spacecraft, possibly anti-gravity drive type vehicles that were far in advance of the space shuttle. So in other words, you could make an argument that's why NASA never went back, because somebody else did, but stealthily and secretly. Now, of course, McKinnon, in no time at all, got found out, and the main reason, or actually there were two reasons why he was, why the attempt was made to have him extradited. One was for the hacking process, and the other one was the claim that he'd actually damaged internal systems when he was doing the hacking.
Right.
And of course, then you had this literal, like, almost 10 years of back and forth of trying to get him extradited, and his lawyer, you know, extending the appeal and so on, and it dragged and dragged and dragged. And eventually, the British government said, no, we're not going to, you know, let him come over. I think the belief was, well, actually, there were all sorts of different arguments. One was that it was sort of a grey area because the story was that, you know, he damaged the systems in the US, but he'd committed his crime in the UK. And so there was this legal grey area as to, well, you know, if you break in someone's house in the US, you're breaking in the house. But if you remotely break into it, you know, where does that place a crime having been committed? And that was sort of the thing. Nobody could figure out if he should be tried, where he should be tried. And that was one of the main things that kept it going. And then there was this issue that he actually did have Asperger's syndrome, which is, you know, a syndrome of the mind, which causes the person to have, in some cases, like obsessive-driven behavior. And, you know, McKinnon did have that.
Well, there's
collectively, you know,
but there's a couple of things with his case that I find extremely fascinating. And the first one is that he was fascinated with UFOs. Now, he had a very basic knowledge of, you know, he wasn't a computer nerd. It wasn't like, you know, he was writing some kind of crazy code for some big company, you know, so he had a basic installation type of job that he was taught how to do. So it's not like he was a computer genius, but he figured out a way when he was installing systems that nobody changed their passwords for administrative level Windows PC use. So they just used the basic password, and he was able to use this little program to access computers that still hadn't changed their passwords. Okay, well, all right. So that's the part that, for me, lends the credibility for Gary. But the other part of it was he was at his mom's house with like some crazy 56K modem. You know what I mean? He didn't have it.
That's true.
Yeah, exactly. Which is part of the reason why he got caught. but also explains the slowness of the download, right? He's waiting for this last download. While this download is coming in, he could see the alien craft in Earth's orbit, Earth in the background, and that's when somebody grabbed hold of his mouse, right? From remotely from Florida, and that was the end of it. But he was able to see, most of the download of this alien craft. And the way that he tells his story, for me, with the detail, is the part that is believable for him. He has nothing else to back it up. But what he does have, he doesn't have pictures or anything, but what he does have to back it up is the United States government freaking out over some guy on a 56K modem who was able to breach our computer system. Unless he saw something that he wasn't supposed to see, it's no harm, no foul. Because they're circumventing this kind of access all day long. Everybody's trying to break in and hack into, and us with them too as well. Okay, it's what we do. We're combating this all day long. So who cares if he accessed some NASA files, unless he saw something, unless he saw what he said that he saw. That's why I believe Gary McKinnon.
Oh, yeah, I don't believe that. I mean, excuse me, I don't disbelieve his story of seeing what he said he saw. I think he probably did. But the government stance in terms of why they went after him so deeply was reportedly not for what he'd seen, but for the damage he'd caused to systems, which was reportedly possibly even in the millions. Now, of course, somebody might say, well, that's a cover story.
Yeah, it was trumped up charges, right? Exactly. An excuse to get him.
Said that,
right.
Yeah, some people have said it was trumped up charges, but then other people have said, no, he may not have done it deliberately, but he did damage the system by when he accessed it, that he did some, even if it was inadvertently, they said he did it. And that was the official reason for the charges being brought, was that somebody had hacked their system and caused severe damage, and it was the severe damage to the system that was going to be one of the major charges, not what he'd seen. So, again, you've got sort of, the other sort of side of the story, so to speak. And but I truly don't think we'll ever know the full story of what happened and what he saw, and what this list of non-terrestrial officers really meant. But I mean, it does serve to demonstrate, one thing. This is why, although I do a lot of research into sort of government files on UFOs, I use the Freedom of Information Act, and I do it legally and what I consider the right way to do it. People might think it's exciting to hack computer systems, but I would say to them, it's not unless you have some weird wish to end up 50 years, in a 8x6 concrete cell with a little window and solitary confinement for the rest of your life. I don't, people think it's sort of exciting to live like some Fox Mulder type on the run from the government. Well, no, it's actually, I'm sure it's not.
Right.
It's, the real world isn't sort of like Mulder or Jack Bauer running around, it's, no, if you do that, you're going to get hauled before a judge, and your life's over. So,
well, what we did the other day, and I never announced this on the web. Maybe I should have. But over at jimmychurchradio.com, if you go over to the forums page right now and scroll down to the UFO landing pad, right on the top, we have posted the complete set of British UFO documents that was released from 1986 to 1992. We have the entire document from the National Archives. It's titled "From Britain with Love." So go, and now I went the other day, and I'm flipping through this, and it's hundreds and hundreds of pages. The entire disclosure that they did. Supposedly, as you know, they held nothing back, right? So from this period, 86 to 92, it's all right here. Go to jimmychurchradio.com, go to the forums page, scroll down, right there, "From Britain with Love," and I scrolled through this, and I look at this. Now I know that it's not complete. Okay, I know. And I understand Nick Pope's position, and I understand the British government's position. We have released everything. There's nothing left for us to release. And that's where my BS meter pegs, right? There's no way that they have released everything. That part I just don't buy into. So question back to you. Do you think that they have released everything, including Rendlesham?
No, I don't. Not for 1 minute, and I'll explain why. I fully actually do believe Nick Pope when he says everything that he's aware of has been declassified. Now, I know Nick quite well because we're both originally from England, and so I often used to sort of hang out with him at conferences, and actually met him once to do an interview with him when he was still in the UFO office. And it's kind of like over here with Project Blue Book. Project Blue Book was the public face and reportedly the sort of main focal point for UFO research, but there have always been rumours of far deeper and more clandestine investigations and groups. And that's kind of the same in Britain. Nick worked for a division of the Ministry of Defence called the Secretariat of the Air Staff. And his job was a very low-level one. It was to investigate reports that came into the Ministry of Defence. A lot of people don't realise his job never took him outside of the MOD. He never did sort of field work, going out to sites or anything like that, or taking photographs. It was just basically responding to phone calls and letters from people who'd seen things. But there have been rumours for years, and many of them have a lot of evidence to back up, that the office that Nick Pope worked in, was actually only one of perhaps 4 or 5, and the other ones were far more secretive, had greater budgets, manpower, and they're the ones who are hiding the sort of really deep and dark secrets. And that's, that's more to do with the intelligence side of the Ministry of Defence rather than just the air staff. And so for that reason, I don't believe Nick has lied at all. I think he's told it as he saw it.
Right.
But I think he just did not have clearance for the next level and the next level and the one behind that where the real, sort of black box is hidden, so to speak.
Do you do Freedom of Information Act requests with both governments, with both the United States and Great Britain? Are you able to do that?
Yeah, I have done. Most of the ones I did were back in England. And what's interesting is that in some of the documents you can find references where the documents were actually circulated to other departments beyond the one Nick worked in. And those departments have not released their files. And I think those are the ones who've got, the photographs, the gun camera footage, who knows, maybe even bodies and debris. I don't fully rule that out. There are a lot of, well, I'd say a lot, but there's perhaps 9 or 10 stories from the UK of what you might call British Roswells, and a number of people have identified certain locations where supposedly alien bodies are held in, preserved states in these large cryogenic cylinders or whatever.
How are you?
And obviously Nick knew nothing about that.
Well, of course, and that's the part where I totally believe, Nick, when he says everything that I was released. Well, yeah, of course. No, I totally 100% believe him. I'm just saying, did they release everything that they have?
No, they didn't.
No.
I would be surprised if we saw the smallest percentage. Most of the reports that have surfaced, although not all of them, perhaps 5% different, but a good 95% were just reports from the general public, which were mailed in or phoned in, and a little investigation was launched. And granted, there were a few civilian and a couple of military reports per year that reached Nick. But even every year, for those couple of reports that reached Nick, UFO researchers in the UK would be contacted by retired military people who said, hey, I had this incident, I was involved in this incident in, say, March 1975. It was reported, it was fully investigated, and then you go through the files and the case isn't there. And that's happened so many times to make it clear, obviously, that these reports are being siphoned off and going to somebody else.
How do you, and I want a couple of examples of this, how do you know when a document has vanished? So obviously when you make that claim, and well, I don't want to say claim, statement, right? When you make that, you have an experience. So how do you know when you've caught them? What is it that you're doing? And give me a specific incident.
I can give you a classic one. I mentioned about other departments being involved. One of the departments of the British military that was long been rumoured to carry out highly secret and sensitive UFO research is called the Provost and Security Services. And that's basically the UK equivalent of the Air Force's Office of Special Investigations over here. It's kind of like the James Bond of the Air Force. They do the sort of espionage and intelligence work and sort of security work, rather than sort of actually taking part in conflicts, in wars. So they are really like the 007s of the British Royal Air Force, the Provost and Security Services. And there have been rumours that they were involved in UFO research for years at a place called RAF Rudlow Manor in the south of England, which actually has this huge underground installation far below it as well, where rumours have come of alien bodies and so forth. Now, in 1993, the British government released an early UFO file from 1962, and I actually got a copy of this file when it was released because it was one of the earliest, thickest files. It was like 300 pages. And contained in there was an investigation undertaken by the Provost and Security Services. And unlike Nick Pope's department, they'd actually sent this guy out to the home of a young woman who'd seen a UFO on several occasions. The guy confiscated her notes and drawings she'd made, and it basically grilled her for like an hour. And his write-up of the visit to this woman's house, and her name was Anne Henson, and he prepared a report. Prepared a report, and this report made its way into this declassified file. And with hindsight, it seems like that file, or that document within the file, was declassified in error, because shortly afterwards it was withdrawn. And I only found out it was withdrawn when a friend of mine, Matthew Williams, also went down to the National Archives. I said, "Hey, Matt, you want to go down because this document's in there?" When he went down, the file had vanished. Nobody could find it. There was no official withdrawal notice, but it could not be found anywhere in the National Archives. But fortunately, I'd made a photocopy when I went down, so I was actually, ironically, the only person who had a copy, and even the National Archives couldn't find the original. So I did an article for the British UFO magazine, as it was called at the time, which was a newsstand magazine, and publicised this document showing, hey, all these stories about the Provost and Security Services going around interviewing people are actually true. I found a document. And then, of course, when the document was found to be missing, nobody else could get it. And people actually said, well, maybe Nick's just, faked it as an April Fool's joke or something.
Of course.
Wasn't.
Right.
And I couldn't prove it because all I got was a photocopy. It actually took like 18 months for the real file to finally surface. And the story was it got misfiled on a shelf somewhere else by one of the archivists. Now, that doesn't happen that often. And for it to happen to a file which seemed to contain almost certainly a document that was declassified in error and opened up this whole situation concerning the Provost and Security Services, I actually think this was an attempt to prevent people from sort of digging further.
Well, yeah, and what if you didn't have the file? If you didn't have it, then suddenly, not only does it not exist, but anybody that's making that request or making that claim is not telling the truth.
Yeah, no, I mean, if I had not because when you go down there, you can photocopy as many documents as you want to. And that's what I did. It costs like sort of 20 cents a page or something like that back then. It was quite expensive per page. So I ran a copy of it off, which was about a 10-page document contained within this 300-page file. But had I not done that, and I told, as I said, Matthew Williams, a friend of mine, go down and check it out, he wouldn't have been able to see the file, period. And actually the only reason why, when the file surfaced, the reason why was because a British politician who was interested in the subject, Martin Redmond, he actually pushed for an inquiry to be launched to find the file. And it was only when a member of the British Parliament, Martin Redmond, said, look, I want this file found, that grudgingly another investigation was undertaken. And then lo and behold, suddenly it surfaced in the archives in London, and we found it. It was on 2 shelves down or whatever, where it should have been.
Yeah, right.
And, yeah. And I actually think, that's what a lot of people don't realise. Sometimes the archivists and the people who declassify the documents, they're so overwhelmed by the number of files that come up for declassification or that remain classified, and so many they have to review. Occasionally, one slips through the net and gets released in error, and I actually think that's what happened here, and this gave us like a brief glimpse into the work of the offices beyond the one in which Nick Pope worked.
Let's change gears for a little, for a second. You sent us a bunch of photographs today. We put up a gallery at jimmychurchradio.com. Now, by the way, I've got some other emails I want to get back to. The reason why I didn't, they kind of reach back into our conversation a little bit, but I want to get to those also before we get to the top of the hour. We have a bunch of other stuff I want to get to, but let's have some fun for a second. And I want everybody to go to jimmychurchradio.com. Just go to the homepage. You know what to do. Just jimmychurchradio.com. Go to the homepage. We've got a Nick Redfern gallery at the bottom of the homepage where we put every guest gallery. It's all right there. The first picture I want you to tell us about is the one, and I'm opening it up now. It's the first one in the top left row. Restricted area, no pass, the trespass. What is this photograph of?
Well, that's actually kind of historical one, and historic as well. You'll see from the sign itself, behind it, there's like a building that's actually an old hangar, or remodeled hangar, but it's still the old hangar. It's the old Roswell Army Airfield in Roswell, New Mexico. And it's the hangar where supposedly the bodies were taken when recovered out of the crash sites outside of Roswell. And you can go, the base itself, it's there's like an airport there, but the entire sort of original military structure, that's gone. But some of the buildings are still left, and that's one of them. And you can walk around there. It's not like, you're sort of getting into Area 51 or something like that. It's sort of wide open. You can wander around because the units are leased out to sort of, private companies and things like that now, and factory units or whatever. And so when I found out which hangar it was, I sort of snapped off a picture and thought, wow, it's sort of a bit of history to actually sort of be right by the hangar where the bodies were allegedly brought in.
Did you hop the fence?
Oh, you didn't need to. I just said to one of the guys, who worked there, I said, hey, I'm interested in UFOs. He said, okay, if I just take a picture? And he said, yeah, I just had to show my driver's license. They opened the gate and let me in, because as I said, it's not part of the military anymore. What it is, it's the city of Roswell leases them out for rent to people who, I think when I went there, it was like a printing press companies or something like that had got the units. So, yeah, that I'm sure they had inquiries all the time, and they're like, the guy just laughed and said, yeah, come on in, just take a few pictures.
Oh, that's incredible. That's incredible. So the hangar itself, the one here, it's like occupied by a printing company now? It's private?
It was something like, I forget, I might be wrong, but this, when I took that picture, that was 2001.
Right.
So it was a long time ago, but it was some sort of factory unit, and but, as I said, the military base is gone, but so all these old buildings are still there, so they lease them out to companies in Roswell that might want to make use of them. But I do remember there was like printing press type things in there, so I think it was something along those lines.
Okay, let's go to the next picture of what looks like to be a dinosaur behind a fence. What is this?
Yeah.
This is picture number 2.
Like yeah, I kind of fooled a couple of people once. I said, oh yeah, there's like this, they keep UFOs at Area 51. Well, there's like Area 52 where they're genetically making dinosaurs or whatever. And so I told it to somebody, and they went, oh my God, are you serious? I said, nah. But no, what it is, that's actually taken just outside Joshua Tree in California. And what it is, it's like one of the, these sort of old-time roadside places you can stop off at in the desert where they've got like two-headed snakes and, six-legged calves and cows or whatever, sort of like a freak show. It was sort of that kind of thing. And that, although it's sort of in silhouette, what it actually is, it's like a life-size or semi-life-size dinosaur actually made out of sort of casted metal and put together. And it's sort of done really well. And there's also like a Tyrannosaurus there as well. And the people who own them sort of stand them by the fence, and you can buy sort of these carved, welded creations, monsters and all sorts of different things. So it's kind of cool because it's like in the middle of the desert. So it's an eerie place to start with. then you got all these sort of cast iron monsters peering over this sort of chain link fence and whatever.
In the United States, I don't know if they did this over in Great Britain or Europe in general. I certainly, when I was, I don't remember much of it, but in the United States, roadside attractions like this were everywhere. When you went on a family vacation during the summer and you loaded everybody up in the station wagon and took off, you went down and you checked off. You know, that's what you were doing. Yeah. You went down, and it seemed like every few miles there'd be some billboards on the side of the road and some crazy thing. But it was great, man. That's part of America, to be honest with you. Okay, so the next picture, which is it looks like some aliens on some boxes in a warehouse. What is this?
You know, like dead aliens laid out on military crates. Or whatever. That's what it is, yeah. Well, that, believe it or not, is actually taken at a U.S. Air Force base in a hangar, no less, at a place called Norton Air Force Base just outside San Bernardino, California. And but it's not something to get too excited about. What happened was, back in 2005, I made a pilot for a Discovery show called X-Ops, and it was kind of like an early version of UFO Hunters, where a team of people would go around and investigate UFO sightings around the US or UFO incidents. And the part of the pilot was filmed at Norton Air Force Base, and amazingly enough, the city of San Bernardino gave permission for the Discovery Channel's team, the company, to do filming inside one of the big hangars there. And actually, it's a hangar that gets used quite a lot. It was used, for example, in Steven Spielberg's TV series Taken. There's one famous scene where there's this huge UFO in that giant hangar. And that was actually in the same hangar where we filmed the show. And the Discovery Channel, I mean, they spent a huge amount of money and bought and had all these props made of aliens and bought all these wooden crates and stamped them U.S. Army 1947 and things like this. And we filmed the episode there. And unfortunately, it was never shown. The program was just shelved. But it was kind of cool, you know, to actually be in a military aircraft hangar with probably the closest thing you would ever imagine to army crates and alien bodies without seeing the real thing.
Well, you know, when you're doing something like this, do the Air Force, has anybody ever come up to you and like pulled you aside and wanted to tell you a private story?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I've heard a lot of stories from old-timers, you know, people who said that they'd had UFO incidents and, you know, pilots chasing UFOs, and, you know, I've spoken to people like that, and I've never actually spoken to anybody, you know, who said, I can tell you where the bodies are stored, that kind of thing. But, you know, there are a lot of stories like that out there, certainly, that other researchers have, you know, followed up on, like Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, supposedly deep underground there in secure vaults and bunkers. There's stories about alien bodies, and obviously Area 51. Even Fort Detrick in Maryland supposedly has some bodies stored because reportedly they contain sort of like extreme viruses that could, you know, potentially affect us. So they're sort of in quarantine. But yeah, I've had a lot of people come to me over the years talking about their own encounters in the military, and so yeah, sort of part of the whole research gig, I guess.
Okay, we'll get back to the photographs in a second, but that leads me back to one of these emails. Let me open it up. Okay, yeah, it's this one here, because in this email he brings up Phil Schneider. And so he says, Jimmy, asked Nick about the Coke can that was seen by live feeds, no delay, in Alice Springs, Australia. Well, you know what? Let's talk about that for a sec, if you know about that incident. But I actually
don't, unfortunately. I don't
okay, well, during the moon landings, supposedly this lady in Alice Springs, Australia, was watching late night feeds live of the moon landings and saw a Coke can in one of the feeds on the moon. Now, and since you don't know about it, I'll explain it to you a little bit. I happen to know a little bit about it, but what nobody else had seen. Now, there were millions and hundreds of millions of people watching the same feeds. Nobody else saw this Coke can except for her. but she went very public about it. Now, the problem with her case is this. She said she was watching it late at night. The feeds that were live at that time in Australia coming in, because of where Australia is on Earth, were actually during the day. So that part of her story just kind of, the whole story fell apart. But the myth, lives on. So, anyway, so he goes, I actually talked to a guy. This is back to the email. I actually talked to a guy back in the 90s, strangely, at one of Phil Schneider's lectures, who said that he was a technician for Stanley Kubrick when they directed the fake moonshot that was shot in the Nevada desert. Also, the prop rock with the capital letter C on it. You know about that.
Yes.
Right. We never went there in '69. Like you said, no technology plus the Van Allen belt. Well, now this whole Arthur C. Clarke, and I wanted to talk about Phil Schneider too, actually. But the whole Arthur C. Clarke angle, you know, is that something that is spoken about over in England? And do people really... Is because it's really built on legendary status here in the United States. It's taken on a life of its own. Is that?
Yeah, you mean the whole like Kubrick sort of being picked up after he did 2001?
Right.
Yeah, I mean the stories they're as visible in the UK as they are in the US. You know, the different theories. I mean, one of the things I would say on this whole track of people seeing weird stuff on footage and whatever, I think there's some really very cool and very weird stuff certainly has surfaced in the last year on a lot of the pictures coming back from the Martian rovers. You know, certainly in the last few months, some very odd stuff where it seems to show imagery of like one that you might have seen this one where it looks just like a lizard, you know, and on the surface of Mars, and it looks like where you can see the tail, the body, the head, the eye, and a lot of weird photographs from Mars that seem to show artifacts and structures that, you know, just don't seem to be random. And I have a lot of suspicions that Mars isn't the dead world we think it is. And I think sometimes, you know, things have come through on these pictures that possibly haven't been picked up initially. And when they hit the public domain, there's so many people now just poring over thousands of pictures, and they're finding weird stuff, you know.
Do you think that there is a cover-up about that? About, you know, actual... Yeah.
Well, I actually do. But where I kind of differ with some people is I'm not sure. Well, I don't think that NASA is orchestrating any cover-up of what's on Mars. But I do think somewhere there's like a secret space program. And I actually wouldn't be surprised if there have been, it might sound controversial, but sort of clandestine flights to Mars. And far more is known somewhere by an agency or like a shadow group than is actually known by NASA. And I think the reason I say that is because if NASA was actively hiding imagery of what was on the surface of Mars, we wouldn't be getting all this footage coming through, sort of weird little insects and, you know, what looked like carvings and stuff like that. It would all be like airbrushed before we saw it. But it's NASA who's releasing it. So that leads me to believe that we're seeing evidence of life on Mars and possibly ancient structures. But I think somebody knows the truth about it, and they're hiding it. And I think NASA could actually be an innocent party, not realizing that somebody else is already up there, you know, like a super secret military program or something like that.
Well, and it seems to me, and I'm pretty vocal about this, but it seems to me, I mean, if I was running NASA and I was trying to figure out what's going on Mars, that I'd be putting these probes and these landers in different places. It seems to me that we keep putting these landers in the wrong spots, and I just don't get it. It seems like if you have any intelligence at all, that you're going to where you suspect of something being there, and they just keep putting it where there obviously isn't anything going on, so they can show us and tell us, hey, look, there's nothing here. We're drilling, we're digging, there's nothing, there's no water, there's this and that, no life anywhere. Where I don't understand that. I really honestly don't. When you say that you believe NASA, well, yeah, because they're putting the landers where there isn't anything. And that's where the conspiracy is.
Well, I would say in response to that, I do wish they would kind of send a lander or two to the whole Cydonia area, you know, where you've got the face on Mars and these weird pyramid-like structures. And let's, like, have some ground-based pictures where they're sort of actually looking up in the direction of these so-called pyramids, and let's see what they kind of look like from a ground-based panoramic view, and let's settle it once and for all. Now, maybe it's too good to hope that's going to happen, but I mean, for me, that would be sort of the crowning thing. But I mean, if you look at these pictures that NASA have sent back, these so-called banyan tree pictures, if you Google Mars plus banyan tree, B-A-N-Y-A-N,
Yep.
you see these weird structures that it kind of looks like you're looking out of the window of an aircraft going over the Arizona desert, where you've got dotted bushes and shrubs and things like that. And you know, the official story is it's just ice crystals. But I mean, if you didn't know what you were looking at, you would think you were flying like over Nevada and seeing a few trees here and there. That's really what it looks like to me.
Yeah, and again, if there really is ice on Mars, okay? Now we can see the pictures. We can see, why aren't we sending landers to that? Because that is water. You know, I just don't understand, and it's just me. If it was, if I was manning all of that, and I'm telling people what to do, I'm going there first, and I'm being serious. I just don't understand. Now, here's another email that just came in. It says, Jimmy, if they couldn't have gone to the moon on their own, but yet they did go to the moon, did they have some help or outside assistance? Maybe ET? That's kind of an out there, but it's actually an honest point.
Well, yeah, I mean, the closest thing I can kind of think of are these claims about how military or scientific agencies and the military have sort of back-engineered alien technology. You know, they've recovered it from crashed UFOs, and then they've tried to duplicate it.
Exactly.
The only problem I have with that, you know, if we're going to make the argument that there's no way we could advance our technology enough to go to the moon in just a few years, could we have even understood and replicated alien technology in the same time frame? You know, it's one thing to replicate, you know, say a Russian spacecraft that you found and you try and duplicate their technology, but to try and duplicate something thousands of years in front of us built on another world and duplicate it in 20 years, I'm not sure if that wouldn't be even more difficult. You know what I mean?
Well, when you hear statements, you know, from von Braun and the other Nazi NASA / I hate saying that word Nazi, but, you know, that were helping us and came over and paperclip and all of that and helped us develop the Apollo program and Mercury and Gemini and everything, where those statements that have been circulated, you know, that, you know, we've had help from out there. We didn't do it on our own. They helped us. Is there any truth to any of that? You know, and it's
yeah.
Well,
but maybe. I mean, I've got to be honest. Yeah, all I know is sort of the stories, like the Von Braun story, that are out there. You know, I think the stories of back engineering are interesting, but I'd like to see some evidence. I mean, it's like the Corso story, Philip Corso, who said, you know, the technology recovered at Roswell essentially kick-started research into things like transistors and night vision and computers and the whole SDI, the Star Wars Defense Initiative thing, and he made a lot of very vocal, clear points where, you know, we can actually prove that this technology was already in place, and you know, I'm not impressed by a lot of Corso stuff at all on back engineering. I don't say it's not possible, but I would really like to see, and I don't mean that they haven't got wreckage and debris and pieces of materials or whatever. I'm just not sure that they're still not at the head-scratching stage, you know, rather than perfecting it and duplicating it and flying to the nearest stars or whatever.
Well, my take on that is this. When I think about the progress and where we have gone since I was born, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and until now, pretty fascinating leaps in technology. Pretty fascinating, you know, and obviously internet, watches and smartphones and things that we have today. We just, you know, that was science fiction in the 60s, but we're living it now. But to go from riding horses in 1900 to go from that to a man on the moon just 69 years later, that's a crazy amount of technology leaps. You are leapfrogging, you know, and when, you know, we barely had jets in World War II, barely. We were just starting to just kind of taste it. But 1945 to 1955, we were still, you know, it was still a prop world, even our bombers and everything. And to go from that just 20 years later, 1945 to 1965, 20 years, that's a blink of an eye. That is the raising of your children. 20 years to go from the P-51 Mustang to being on the moon is a crazy, and that's where Corso's situation for me kind of has some truth behind it. Not some truth, a lot of truth. Because I can't think of any other. I can't think of any other reason. You know, I know we're getting smarter by the day, but that is crazy. I'm serious.
No, I understand what you're saying. I mean, and I don't doubt that if we do have crashed UFOs, the primary focus would be on trying to duplicate it for our own purposes, whether for military or defense purposes or science or whatever. But the only thing I would say is, I mean, you're right. You point out it was just 20 years, and for us to go from where we did, if we did it all on our own in 20 years, that is incredible. But I would find it even more incredible if we were actually able to do all that and totally understand and totally duplicate technology created on another world by creatures that could be 10,000 years ahead of us. You know, our scientists, if our scientists were struggling to do it on our own, could we really understand the technology built 10 light years away by people we don't even understand and are far in advance of us, and still make that and still replicate that technology in 10 or 20 years? Do you see what I mean?
I do, and this is my answer to that. We're trying to figure things out. We're trying to design a transistor. We know what we need to achieve here. We know, we're working on this idea, but then to suddenly look at, it's like anything, and then all of a sudden you're shown a circuit board, something taken out of this craft with electronics that we've never seen before, but suddenly we can, well, that would be a way to use this. Now we know we need to get to here. We're here now with our circuit design and PC boards back then. It wasn't printed circuit boards. It was point-to-point wiring. But we knew that we wanted to get that. But now we're seeing it designed. Now we can bridge the gap. That's why it can happen very, very, very quickly. And it's kind of like when you go back and think about trying to create fire. And I'm not talking about caveman days. I'm talking about in the 1800s, a pocket lighter, a way to, light flint, a way to get things out. Well, we knew that we needed to do that. We knew we could create fire, but how do we get to it quicker? And it's kind of like that. We were designing electronic circuits in 1945. Of course we were. We had dashboards in aircraft. There was plenty of circuitry done. We had radios. We knew about the applications of it. But when you're shown an example of what it could be, now we can get to there faster. And that's the part for Corso, to me, that makes a lot of sense. It just does.
Time-wise, it is an intriguing intriguing angle time-wise, because you've got the Roswell thing in the middle. The only thing I would sort of come back to, which is like one slightly different but also sort of related point, is, I kind of made the analogy, let's say we time-traveled a Volkswagen back to the 1600s and crashed it, or just left it in the ground. Now, the people of that era would probably be able to work out that it was some sort of vehicle. They could push it along with the wheels.
Right.
And they would probably work out how to open the door, and they would even be able to find that if somebody pushed it and somebody turned the steering wheel, it would go left and right. And so they could perhaps have it pulled along by horses, even, be like a little early metallic carriage. But they wouldn't be able to work it how it's supposed to work, because there was no way to make gasoline back then.
Right.
So in other words, you've got this craft, or this vehicle, which you cannot use it because you don't have the technology to create the fuel. And that kind is what I think about sometimes with these crashed spacecraft. It's not so much that we haven't got it or we don't understand the technology, but if we don't have the ability to create the fuel or the mechanisms, how do we fly it? I think that's an important thing to remember, is that it's not so much having the technology, it's whether you can create what's needed to fly the craft. Kind of like if you can't create gasoline in the 1600s, you couldn't power a car that was time travel back. In the same way, you might understand an atomic bomb. You know, you could teach the finest mind in the 19th century how an atomic bomb works, but if you can't create fissionable material, you're not going to have an atomic weapon. Do you see what I mean? But the technology hasn't caught up to create fissionable material. So that's kind of one of the issues I see as well, is, you know, not necessarily just understanding the technology, but being able to physically create something that's so alien, you know.
Right. And that is where, for me, where Corso's book is so brilliant, in that it's not necessarily, we didn't really backwards engineered anything, according to his book. That's not what we did. We saw what could be done, and we tried to do something with the material that we found. You know, it wasn't that we were trying to figure out how to fly our own flying saucers and no, it was Kevlar, it was optical fiber, it was, you know, the printed circuit boards. It was those examples that said, hey, you know, and so back to your Volkswagen analogy, what would we achieve from that in 1600s? Holy crap. What is this? This is glass. Oh, we can do this with glass? Oh, this is rubber from a tree. Oh, we could make rubber tires. Oh, you know, it's examples of that. Oh, we can bend metal like this? You know, those are the examples that, you know.
No, I understand that. But, I mean, with Corso, he was kind of talking about far more sophisticated things like lasers and integrated circuits rather than just like a glass pane window or whatever, you know. But,
right.
I mean, it could go. I mean, I don't deny the story. I just think, you know, that it's almost sort of two-part. This one guy who had access to this material, he successfully seeded in US technology, and then in no time, you know, we've made all these advances. And I'm not saying it's impossible, you know, but I think we do also need to balance it out and see what we were doing at that time. I mean, it's kind of like when you point out how different things occurred in 20 years from 45 to 65. Well, you know, sort of look back from, say, 1984 to today. You know, you can, on any American streets, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, it just happens to be true. On any American street at 6 o'clock now, you won't see kids riding the bikes around town. They'll all be in their bedroom, you know, on their iPhone.
Right.
30 years ago, they were riding around town on bikes, having fun, staying out till late, you know, playing games, whatever. Today's children are isolated, alone, and it sounds horrible to say, getting bigger and more diabetic by the day. That's the trend. No, I mean, I'm not being fun.
No, you're speaking
funny.
about me personally. Obviously, you've been to my studio. I've got a refrigerator sitting right next to me full of Coke. But this is.
I mean, that just shows how technology has changed. And I don't think there's anything alien about the internet. But what I do think is that the internet has become so globally dominating that it's changed the way particularly children live in the last 30 years. You know, that the days of racing around town at 7 o'clock on your bike, you know, setting up tents and having weekends away, you know, with the next door's kids or whatever, it doesn't happen anymore. It's gone.
Well, this is for me, this is where the fascinating angle, and I know everybody listening right now will agree or has thought about what I'm about to say. This is 2014. Okay, the year 2000 was 14 years ago. Okay, we can all do a little elemental math, but think about that. That's 15 years. The year 2000 was yesterday. And in 1960, 15 years before that was 1945. Just a blink of an eye. And the technological leap that occurred in that same 15 years, just like now, When anybody that was alive in 1960, 1961, 62, 63, when JFK was assassinated, a blink of an eye was World War II. Everybody still remembered it, just like now we remember the Gulf War. So to have that amount of technology occur, that amount of invention and creativity to happen in such a short space of time, I don't get it. The creation of the internet from 1995 until now and what we've seen, yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. But that ain't going to the moon. That's not. It's just not. And that's where Corso's book kind of fascinates me. Now, okay.
Oh, it fascinates me. Don't get me wrong. I just think we need to sort of look at all bases. But I think the most important thing of all is what me and you are doing right now is the right thing. Rather than one being like a skeptic versus a believer, we're actually having a rational debate, which is not. And we're both sort of believers in the UFO phenomenon.
Yes.
And we're having a rational debate on one aspect where, we kind of have differing views. And I think if the UFO community could do that more, we would actually be in better condition, because what the problem is, the different aspects of the case polarize people, where it just descends into who can shout the loudest, and it doesn't achieve anything. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Doing what we're doing, which actually back and forth, well, I think this and I think that, and this is why I think this and this is why you think that, that actually allows the audience, I think, to sort of get a better appreciation of all the different sides and be able to consider them, rather than just hearing one person screaming, you're a complete asshole or whatever.
Bleep. Yep. We talk about this on just about every guest that is on this show. But that is, you're absolutely right. One of the beautiful things, and I think when guests come on this show and we have this type of discussion in this format, freely, without being interfered with by any government agency or regulations or any fear of what you're about to say, is one of the beautiful things about society today. We can come on and freely talk about anything without any fear. Well, so far I haven't had any Men in Black show up at the house. I do expect, I leave the studio one night, I go home, I hang out, there's going to be a knock at the door, or one day I'll have some guests, at the studio, and they'll have been followed here. I do have that fear. But we are able to freely communicate right now about some pretty scary subjects that we wouldn't have been able to do years ago. Or if we were on terrestrial radio, on AM radio, it just would not happen. Now, okay, now, before we start to run out of time, and thank you for hanging in. I know that you're very ill, but now we're at the point where I'm not going to let you go. We have a couple of things I need to get into.
I wouldn't say I'm not very ill. It's just a pain in the neck when you're sort of taking a breath and you get that kind of tickling, that sets you off with a cough. So.
This picture that's on JimmyChurchRadio.com of Stonehenge.
Oh, yeah.
So everybody just go there, click on the picture. I want you to tell me why you sent this picture, but then we're going to talk about Stonehenge and also ancient aliens. And I've got to get into, that's one of my favorite subjects, not only Stonehenge, but Göbekli Tepe, ancient civilizations. So let's touch into this a little bit. But everybody just go to JimmyChurchRadio.com, click on Nick's Stonehenge picture. Why did you send me this picture, and what are we looking at?
Well, I took that picture probably about 15 years ago, something like that now. I've been to Stonehenge many times, and it's although we're living in the 21st century, when you get there, it's almost like taking a sudden trip back in time. And the reason I included that was because I know you said you're going to bring things up in the conversation and whatever. And one of the things that people may not know is that there's actually been a significant number of UFO sightings in the modern era around Stonehenge, and very often sort of like orb-like objects, not talking about sort of gleaming, huge flying saucers, but things from like the size of a tennis ball to a basketball, balls of light flitting around the stones and the immediate vicinity. And so nobody really knows what these things are, but they're either intelligently controlled or there's some sort of intelligent form of energy, like a pure energy, but that has an intelligence to it.
Have you seen this? Have you seen the little white thing that's in the sky in this picture?
No.
Okay, go back and look. I'm looking right at the center stone, right? Right above it at 12 o'clock in the middle of this picture is a little white disc. What is
I'll have
you
to
don't
wait till after. I can't get to the computer at my laptop right now. But
this you've never noticed this? I've got the picture enlarged. I've got the picture enlarged on my computer.
Oh, wow.
And I'm looking at it right here. Now, either because I can see the moon off to the right, it's not that, and I can see but there is a very obvious white disc or ball right in the middle of this picture. Okay, look, I'm asking everybody out there that is looking at this picture right now on the internet, send me an email and I will forward it to Nick so he doesn't think that we're crazy. I'm looking at this right now. I thought that's why you sent the pic.
No, I didn't. I hadn't actually seen that. I guess it's kind of like, not seeing the wood for the trees or something. But what's interesting is that Stonehenge is in the county of Wiltshire, and Wiltshire is where most of the crop circles appear in Britain every year. And in many of the crop circles, we see these strange little balls of light flitting around at like anywhere from 5 feet in the air to sort of 20 or 25, and very often flying at high speed. And so they may well be the same orbs, or whatever you want to call them, that are seen around Stonehenge as well.
I just got an email in, and we're going to stay on the Stonehenge picture because this is fascinating to me that you didn't know about this. I want everybody to look at this picture. But also, just got this email in from Ben, and it says, what if we were seeded the information? What if we had someone to explain how to use the alien technology? And that's exactly where I want this conversation to go. I think is a very, very real possibility that we were just taught, just like Corso, right? We were shown what we could do, like creating fire. We were shown, how possibly to do things. How do we make the leap to make the wheel? What are the things? How did everybody on planet Earth suddenly know how to use a bow and arrow? When you know what I mean? Where we had
exactly what you mean.
Yeah, and how did these fantastic leaps in technology occur? I mean, I can't imagine sitting around a campfire one night and falling asleep and waking up going, "Hey, man, a little bit of I'm going to make some string today, and I'm going to make a bow. I'm going to sharpen some flintstone. I'm going to make an arrow, and I'm going to go kill me some buffalo." I don't know how that leap in technology happened. I can't explain it.
No, that's a good point. I mean, there are actually a lot of interesting stories. For example, there's a story about Nikola Tesla. Was a really brilliant scientist digging into some deeply fringe areas, who believed at one point that he was actually in contact with extraterrestrials. And then you look at people who sort of spontaneously surface but brilliant, like Einstein. You have to wonder if somebody has targeted them, and somebody has been selected. Perhaps even unknowingly, they think they're coming up with all this information themselves, but it's kind of like being mainlined down to them. And I think there could be something to that. And this sort of ties in with the whole angle of channeling, which is a subject I'm very interested in. The idea that alien-human communication might not always occur physically, but if we could sort of concentrate our minds, you could have like a mental communication. For example, there are a number of experiments that have been done where people have taken like hallucinogenics like LSD and peyote and things like that, and claim to have contacted higher beings in the past that today we would call extraterrestrials. I mean, a famous example is the infamous occultist Aleister Crowley, who in the 1910s took part in this ritual, the Amalantra working, when he was high on mescaline and hashish. Mm-hmm. And he had this experience with a creature known as Lamb, L-A-M. Now, if you Google Aleister Crowley plus Lamb, you'll see the picture that Crowley drew of this being lamb that he contacted in this altered state. And it looks just, apart from the eyes being totally black, they're almost like hypnotic looking. It looks just like a classic alien grey, like the little shoulders and the big head and penetrating eyes and a slit for a mouth. And it looks like the being on the cover of Whitley Strieber's Communion, apart from the totally black eyes. So I think that the whole idea of sort of mainlining information, channeling information from beings into our minds is actually, I think that does occur. And I think it can occur through mental concentration, but I think it can also occur through stimuli like LSD and psychedelics that I don't believe at all that they just create random hallucinations. I think they actually kind of open us up to different portals of existence, and if you can understand them, you can kind of contact what's on the other side. I mean, one book I'd recommend people read on all this is Rick Strassman's book, DMT, The Spirit Molecule, which is how DMT kind of opens these doors as well, and the evidence seems to suggest that, you know, it actually does lift a veil between sort of our world and somewhere else.
Well, this whole DMT phenomena that is out there now, there's a lot of researchers that are talking about it. Not to get into names and stuff, I certainly could, but my point is with DMT. Now, I've never smoked it, never snorted it, never seen it, so I have no personal experiences. But I have definitely gone and checked out other people's personal experiences with it, reading and otherwise. And the one thing that I will say, that the drawings, the paintings, the descriptions of people's experiences who are not only didn't have them at the same time, but unrelated, different ages, different backgrounds, all different, you know, from the 70s and 80s and 90s and now and today and stuff, that they're all very similar. I mean, spot on the money, where the whole alternative reality, a different rhythm, different frequency, parallel universe type of description. Also, the people that they encounter while on DMT is a fascinating subject. Am I going to go out and purchase some DMT tomorrow? Not likely. But I do find that very fascinating, and including with Aleister Crowley's description of his LSD and mescaline use. Well, it was mescaline back then. I don't think LSD.
Yeah,
was
mescaline and hashish he was on, but you know, he got himself in this altered state. You know, sort of finely tuning his mind. And you can find a lot of cases like that. It's like a shamanic experience in the jungle or the desert.
Right.
That's why a lot of people, they write off the contactee movement of the 50s. I actually don't. I wrote a book on this with the stunningly unoriginal title of Contactees, which looked into this. And I actually think many of the contactees had genuine experiences because they were sort of more like shamanic, that go out in the desert and sort of commune with the Space Brothers who would come down. But very often there are indications that the contactees were in sort of like an altered state as well. And I think that may be, you know, we think the contact's always going to be with aliens who come walking out of a metal craft like in the day the Earth stood still. I actually think they could be really alien, to where perhaps their main primary form of contact could be like an altered out-of-body state or something like that. And maybe that's how they mainline the information through to certain people, possibly even like Einstein and Tesla.
I was just reading an email, and Ed out there, whoever Ed is, he just said, I've got something to say, and then he sent me a blank email. I don't know if you realize this, so I don't know how to, but so Ed, resend. I'm just letting you know. Well, back to Stonehenge and the pagans. Was there ever, has there been rumors of any drug use or anything with the pagans and their rituals that they were doing?
Oh, yeah. I mean, altered states, again, were a part of ancient man in the UK. For example, a lot of the stones at Stonehenge, and a lot of people don't realise there's many other stone circles and huts and things like this in the UK. And many of them, the stones kind of resonate. And one of the theories is that music that they were designed in specific ways, so that when the people of that era would play music, you know, with chants and drums and things like that, possibly even early stringed instruments, they would resonate and echo, and it would, you know, they would create like an ongoing, almost like a chant, like a hypnotic chant or a hypnotic tune, and the echoing and everything else would render the person or the people into, again, like a hypnotic state, which would allow them to sort of not necessarily be affected with psychedelics, but they would still be in an altered state of mind, which would allow them to communicate with what they would call the gods, what we might call aliens today, which, and they may even be something totally beyond our understanding. You know, they may not be extraterrestrial, they may be interdimensional, or who knows what. But there are good indications that ancient man possibly used this resonating and music and so forth to sort of put them into at least a definitively relaxed, altered frame of mind, if you like.
When you were standing at Stonehenge, and I'm looking at this picture here, and it's such an intimidating, you know, these rocks are not small. They're just not. They're huge. Mm-hmm. When you look at those, and this is the question of the ages. I don't want to repeat myself, but because of Ancient Aliens, that program, and the public knowledge of monolithic structures, and through that period, 5,000 BC, 2,500 BC, and you start to look at these rocks, knowing what we can and cannot do today. So when you stand at Stonehenge and you look and you know where the rocks came from, what's your answer? How did they get these from point A to point B 5,000, 7,000 years ago?
Well, it's not so much just that. It's how do they get that huge top stone on top of the two?
Yeah, the capstones, yes.
Stones. Yeah. That's the bigger issue. Well, what's interesting, I actually wrote about this in my book, The Pyramids and the Pentagon, is that if you look back at Stonehenge, the Egyptian pyramids, some of the structures in ancient Greece, Rome, and South America, many of them have legends that the stones are moved into place via sound or music. And the legends talk about the stones being moved to like a magical, like flute in one case, or to the sound of magical whistling. But it all comes down to sound. And this actually ties in with something that is now being researched quite deeply. It's called acoustic levitation. And it basically involves the use of highly charged sort of directed sound waves. And you create you have two opposing sound waves, and it creates in the middle what's called a resonance zone. And success has been had in lifting small objects in this resonance zone by directing carefully directed sound waves into this one particular area. And so we're now doing sort of early research in this, but if you look back at these original legends, it sounds like somebody in the distant past may have perfected acoustic levitation and was able to use directed acoustics to literally lift stones, kind of like pushing a piece of wood along on a stream of water or whatever, that kind of thing. And, you know, if you look at the biblical legends, you've got the walls of Jericho, how they were brought down to the sounds of a trumpet.
That's right.
Trumpet. And that's like using the same technology, but from an offensive military perspective. You know, instead of building things, you're using acoustic technology as a weapon, which actually is one of the reasons why it's being researched now. So I actually think that whether it was extraterrestrials or it was whether an ancient human civilization that, you know, came long before the pharaohs or whoever, maybe even 10, 20,000 years ago, I think they perfected acoustic technology, and that at some point the technology was still around long after the originators had gone, and the people of that era understood enough of it to make their own structures, even if they may have inherited the technology, in other words, instead of created it. And then over time it degraded, and of course nobody could duplicate it, and today we just see it as fairy stories. But I honestly do believe that acoustic levitation is the key to how all these structures were built.
When I envision that, and I've thought about it a lot, this is the thing. For me, I think that if everybody is picturing some guy standing around with a bunch of trumpets and floating rocks, I don't think that's what the case was. But it would have made the rocks lighter. so they could pick them up and then push them along and assist them with this. I totally believe that is absolutely possible. Now, it would be hundreds of guys with trumpets, but you know what I mean? Blowing through, but...
Well, actually, they're not talking about sort of a trumpet as such or anything like that. It's actually like a highly charged, sophisticated piece of technology which would create like a massive, like directed sound wave. I mean, gigantic, where it could kill a person. That's what we're talking about. But would have the ability to kind of lift like a multi-ton stone, like 3 or 4 tons into the air, and it could be gently pushed along. But it's interesting, I've said all cultures. I mean, there's a famous one from South America where supposedly like a race of dwarfs built one of the ancient pyramids by whistling the stones into place.
Right.
You've got other ones, it's a musical instrument. Somebody else, it's like a lyre, which was an ancient form of like a guitar. In the Middle East, it was trumpets. But it all comes down to like distorted stories of somebody using a sound-based technology, which we really don't understand. But... so it's kind of difficult to understand the concept. It's not as simplistic as, okay, guys, blow the trumpets, the stones move. It's not like that.
Right.
But it is. I think acoustic technology somehow that is the key to the answer.
I think you need to go back, Nick, after the show tonight. Just wonder what the heck I'm talking about. Go back and look at this Stonehenge picture, because when you bring up orbs. And things. Now, look, it could be a star, but this picture was taken. You can see the shadows, so it's either early in the morning or in the afternoon. But it's certainly a blue sky.
I think it was. I can actually remember when I went there because I was doing like a bus tour where people paid, to sit on the bus, like a huge coach type bus.
Right.
And I sort of did like a lecture from the front where we toured all different areas, and I sort of spoke on the microphone, like there's Stonehenge on the right, and we stopped there for 15 minutes, 20 minutes or whatever, and then went off to the next site or whatever. And so I'm pretty sure it was afternoon because we had like a 3-hour drive to get there, and we left in the morning. So it probably was late afternoon, something like that.
Well, there's a few artifacts in this picture. All I'm going to do is, after the show tonight, I'm going to load this in to Photoshop, and I'm going to blow this up, and I'm going to see exactly what that is up there. You've scanned this picture, you can tell there's a few artifacts or some hairs and stuff. Okay, I can appreciate all of that. But what this is an out of focus, obviously off in the distance, bright spot in the sky that looks a little bit too big, a lot too big to be a star. So I just want to know, and I'm just surprised that you've never noticed this before.
Well, I guess what it was, when I was working on a number of books, whenever I'm writing books, you want to get pictures. So I always sort of take pictures whenever I go anywhere, even if at that time I'm not working on anything. So I guess I took pictures of Stonehenge, and I've sort of really only looked at Stonehenge, oh, that's a good picture, I'll use that in that book. Not sort of really focused on what else might be in the picture as well,
Right. Okay, let's go to, wow, man, the time is flying by. What is this picture? It looks like it's an airplane hangar. Is this back at Roswell with it's a stealth thing in the middle and then a couple of obvious
Oh, yeah. Well, that was actually taken on the same day that I took the restricted access sign. That's actually another part of the same hangar. And what that was, the guys who ran the hangar or rented the hangar in 2001, because they knew, the story and the legend that this was the hangar where the bodies were taken, they actually had like some tool makers or people who were good at sort of making models and so on. They actually got them to make models so they could put them on display so people would know where the hangar was. And those models would probably be about sort of 6 to 8 feet long, and the one that looks like a 1950s sci-fi one with a dome, I think was about 4 feet high, something like that. And so they're like models that are being cast by the workers in the factory there just to sort of pay homage to the original crashed UFO legend.
There's, the bad side of me just says anybody could fake a picture with these if they knew what they were doing.
Oh, yeah, I could say, oh, yeah, that's on the edge of Area 51, and I mentioned
Right. That's what I'm saying. From a distance, through the fence. Oh, check this out.
Yeah, but sorry to disappoint people. No, it's just a little few models that the people at the old factory made.
Okay, now the Museum of the Weird Lagoon.
Yeah, well, that one was a picture of me standing next to the creature of the Black Lagoon. That was taken about a year ago, and that was actually taken at a place in Austin, Texas, called the Museum of the Weird. And, we were talking earlier about these roadside attractions and so on. Well, this one, the Museum of the Weird, is actually in downtown Austin. I think it's on 6th Street or 8th Street. And it's kind of like this cool 3-story old building, which from the outside just looks like a regular old building, from 80 years ago in the old part of Austin. When you walk inside, it kind of opens up into this like 3 or 4 story building where you've got 2-headed cows on display and an allegedly real mermaid and things like this. And, you can see it's all winding and corridors and spiral staircases, and there's different levels. And I'll tell you what they've got. They've got like if you imagine King Kong in the original movie, they've got like a life-size head of King Kong, which is about 12 feet high. It looks really good. And there's like a 10-foot high King Kong paw, like his right paw, which is kind of half open and half closed. And you can go and stand inside it and have your photograph taken as if King Kong's holding you like you did Fay Ray in the original movie, And it's got some really amazing displays like mummies and zombies and werewolves, kind of like wax museum type things, and all sorts of things, as I said, on display. Is it a real mermaid or is it a hoax, that kind of thing. And it's like got a cool carnival atmosphere to it, and you can buy sort of T-shirts and pins and scarves and hats and posters and all sorts of things, and you sort of never get bored because there's all sort of little hidden rooms and corridors and all sorts of things running off it.
Well, one of the things, and this email just came in, and I was actually going to bring this up, Coral Castle. Now, yeah, because Coral Castle involves 4, 5, 6 different subjects that we've talked about tonight, all wrapped into one. How did everything get moved? How did everything get built? What was the secret in the levitation? How did he deal with gravity? Did he have help? Did he know something that we didn't? And it's a roadside attraction. It's kind of all of the above. So what's your take on Coral Castle?
Well, yeah, I actually think Coral Castle could actually be like a modern-day equivalent of somebody who either stumbled on or possibly was channeled, the ways and means to actually achieve this. I wouldn't be surprised if, you got somebody who's really clever who may well have stumbled on the secret. Kind of like one of these secrets that's so easy to, sort of so weird, it's easy not to understand it and ever find it. But when you do, it suddenly becomes clear. But, yeah, Coral Castle, this sort of enigmatic place in Florida where you've got these stones, sort of massive multi-ton blocks that have been moved reportedly by just one guy, and still to this day nobody really has an answer as to how he did it. Nobody ever saw a bunch of cranes coming in or anything like that, or 20 or 30 friends coming in with ropes and pulleys. It was like the one time that one minute they weren't there and the next day they were, and then the next day something else had been moved. And I don't think it was just like a piece of trickery. I think he stumbled on somehow the secrets to know how to move these gigantic stones.
Now, wasn't there, this is my memory working, so please go with me on this, but wasn't there some kind of secret box involved in some of the pictures? There was some kind of, that he never revealed what his secret was, but didn't it involve a box of some kind?
I'm not sure on the box angle, but I do know that there were sort of like allusions to, he'd got some sort of technology or some really weird novel secret as to how the weight of the stones could be sort of taken away. It could be the weight could be nullified to make them easier to move. And it was the implication was that if you knew how to do it, it was really simple, and it didn't involve, it didn't require anything like gigantic futuristic machines. it was actually something more simpler but extremely alternative, and that again to me kind of ties in with like acoustics and.
Well, he certainly had
a. Angle might be right. Yeah.
Yeah, he certainly had a secret that he didn't share, and he took it to his grave, and he did do it by himself. And that's the part that you're not going to take anything away from that part of the story. It was done. He did it by himself, and moving some of those blocks, and it wasn't like there was one or two. He built the entire thing by himself. So okay, let's jump into.
It even impressed Billy Idol to write a song about it. That's true.
What song was that?
Sweet 16. It's all about Coral Castle.
Oh, I did not know. I did not know that. I did not know. All right, let's talk about ancient aliens. Specifically, now you've been on the show quite a bit. Are you on this season too as well?
I'm on a couple of. I can never be sure because what they do. They usually contact me to say, hey, we're filming for the next season, and I'll perhaps do interviews that might cover subjects that appear across 6 episodes. So I'm never really sure which ones I'm in, but what usually happens is a friend or someone will say, hey, I saw you on last night's show, and I was like, oh, okay, nice of them to tell me I was on, So then I'd sort of go back and try and record it if it's repeated again. But so you're never really sure which ones you're going to be on because it's all filmed at once.
Were we visited in ancient times?
Well, yeah, I think there's a good chance we were. I think there's 2 possibilities, and it could be a combination of the 2. Either we were visited by extraterrestrials, or in different parts of the world, when certain parts of the world were still primitive, there were highly advanced races that since then destroyed themselves, but who had highly advanced technology, and that appeared as gods, but they were race far in advance, like the Atlanteans, if you like, or the Lemurians, as they've become known. Or it could be a combination of the 2, that there were competing forces, extraterrestrials visited, perhaps waged war with an advanced human civilization, and also, tried to upgrade the more primitive parts of the world. It's like today, we have internet, but there are still tribes in South America that are using spears and bows and arrows.
Right.
So I sometimes wonder if, there could have been highly advanced terrestrial civilizations on the planet when other people were still, at a very primitive level. But also, what interests me and why I do think there probably is like an ancient astronaut perspective on all this is the deep similarities between what we see at Giza in Egypt, like the pyramids and the Sphinx, and the very similar things at Mars in Cydonia, where you've got pyramids there and this almost Sphinx-like face on Mars. And I think there's some sort of connection in our prehistory that we've long forgotten that kind of somehow links us with Mars in some fashion.
Do you think that is the best example of the ancient astronaut theory, or is there another example that is a little more, that sways the argument? And I certainly believe that today, more and more of the status quo is now accepting that absolutely, we've been visited, and it's crazy to think that we haven't been. But what would be the best example? Okay, the Cydonia pyramid, Mars thing, but certainly there must be something that is stronger than that.
Well, I think. So I would say the face of Mars is probably not a visible one in the sense, we've got something we can look at and ponder on. But one of the things that does fascinate me is the old Indian text, the Mahabharata, which talks about these sort of competing factions fighting some sort of war in northern India thousands of years ago. And people have suggested the Mahabharata dates back sort of 6,000 years or 8,000 years. There are other theories it might be based on an even older document going back like 20 or 30,000 years. When you read it, you'd imagine some sort of war 10, 20,000 years ago between armies on horseback with bows and arrows and spears and so on, and shields and swords. We actually talk about these aerial battles with these so-called Vimanas, which could unleash these these powerful weapons that would cause gigantic explosions and huge pillars of smoke would just, hang in the sky, and the people who survived the detonation would die days afterwards with their hair falling out and the nails falling out. And when you read it all, this huge blinding flash, it actually sounds like an early nuclear war, like a localized atomic skirmish between two warring factions. And, I often wonder if that was like some sort of alien event, to possibly wipe out certain races they didn't want developing on the planet. Maybe they came down here and kind of wanted to clean things up a bit and, just exterminated certain portions. The Mahabharata is not unlike some of the stories from Atlantis, this mighty race that was extinguished. And I do sometimes wonder if there was sort of like an extermination program by extraterrestrials. And if you read the Mahabharata, it sounds chillingly like a description of an ancient nuclear war.
Oh yeah, it certainly does. And although I appreciate and understand, the view that you have, because that's an obvious, not obvious, but when you translate those texts and you read them, that's the way they read. But this is the way that my mind works. Mine's a little bit more perverted than that, in that when you just take the idea of the Vimana, and they would turn around and write, and it's not only the Vimana, but the flying cities and so forth, the floating city. So when you take that idea, that kernel, that germ of that idea, this is where my mind is a little bit stranger. It's what made them, what did they see that made them write that? Because they saw something. And back then, when we're talking 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10,000 years ago, when, the texts date back 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years, but the stories are based older than that. So what is it that they were seeing? Because, man, we didn't have the obvious stuff, planes and nuclear bombs. So what was it that they saw in the sky that caused them to document it, to write it down in the fashion that they did? Because they saw something. It probably wasn't man. It could have very much been, alien in nature that was here. They didn't understand what they were seeing, and that's the way that it got. What was it that they saw? That's the part for me. You can take the translations literal. That's great. Fantastic. I understand. I do too. But what was it that they saw? That's the part, because they didn't have a camera. They didn't photograph anything. They did the best they could to make sure that it was documented for everybody else in the future, so they recorded what they saw. That's the part for me that I think is just completely twisted, and there's no answer for.
No, I think today we'll probably never really know the full story, but I think all these things, whether it's acoustic levitation, the Mahabharata, the face on Mars, what it tells me is that we don't understand half of our history. If you go back, say, more than about 5,000 or 6,000 years, it really starts to get foggy, past the Egyptians and the Sumerians and so forth. It really gets dark as to the lineage of what was going on. And if there were people, whether extraterrestrials or human civilizations 20, 30, 40,000 years ago, some of these enigmatic structures and findings might suggest, then I think, we just don't know the half of it. I think there could well be cases and, where civilizations flourished and got wiped out, and maybe it's like a cyclical thing that we're destined to sort of repeat stuff over and over again, or aliens intervene because the human race just can't control itself, and let's start again and try the experiment over and see if they get it right this time.
Do you think there was, and before we'll wind this down now, and again I want to say thank you for fighting through your bronchitis and coming on the show. A lesser man would have used that as an excuse. Because,
I don't never. No, the way I look at it is, it's not like I've got a brain tumor or something. I can fight ways good. I'm tougher than a bit of bronchitis.
What about Giza? What about the Egyptians? And when you look at that with a modern set of eyes, and you look back, is there anything that just yells out? Just they didn't do that by themselves. That's Go ahead. I mean, I think it is a singular event that we can all go right out to Giza right now and go to the deserts of Egypt and walk around Luxor and Memphis and walk around these places and just go, there's just no way that they did this 5,000 years ago on their own. It's impossible.
I mean, one of the things a lot of people don't know is that the stones that make up the pyramids were actually quarried 500 miles away, and that's provable. So in other words, it's not like the stones were just moved 50 feet from, a quarry 50 feet from where the pyramids stand now. No, they had to be transported 500 miles across the desert before the construction even began. 500 miles isn't just, your next door neighbour's front yard. It's a hell of a long distance when you've got to transport it in the desert. And the other thing that really kind of intrigues me about when we talk about the history of the pyramids and when they were all built and so on, is the research of Robert Schoch and John Anthony West about the possibility that the Sphinx is far older than we're led to believe, because it seems to show weathering for water, but not just running water like from a lake or a moat has been suggested, but massive amounts of water coming from the sky. And that could only have been when Egypt wasn't the desert it is today, but when it was a fertile landscape. And so if that is, and both men have made a very good, strong case that this does indicate that the Sphinx is way older than we believe it to be. And so if that is the case, I think there's like a distinct possibility that the pharaohs and the Egyptians may not even have built the pyramids. I sometimes wonder if they actually inherited them from a race that even they may not have known who they were. But they were the ideal buildings and constructions for them to use. The perfect thing. You just inherit this thing that's already there.
Well, no, that is a great point. And let me back that point up. The thing that is fascinating, well, there's 1,000 things that are fascinating about Giza, but the thing that really blows my mind is until modern man showed up, and I'm talking, 2,000 years ago in Egypt. I mean, basically, those pyramids were just sitting in the desert, and nobody knew what they were. Nobody knew anything about them. They were just a couple of rock things in the desert. Nobody knew how to read hieroglyphics. Everything was forgotten about. Nobody knew anything about those. We've only just in modern times found out everything that we know today about the pyramids. So they were completely forgotten about. And that we know, that is fact. So if that is the case, how many times could they have been forgotten about? Exactly what you're saying. Nobody really knows, and we don't really know when they were built, period. The same thing with the Sphinx. Schoch was on this show last week, and I had John Anthony West on a couple of months ago, maybe 3 months ago, about this very same subject. And I firmly believe that, we've had a few different civilizations that have come and gone that we don't know anything about, completely forgotten. And the example of it is Giza. That is an example of nobody knows anything. Well, look at the Mayans. There's another example, Nick. Today there's a handful of people that can read the codexes, the Mayan scripts. Today it's like a lost language, and it's not that old. It doesn't take us long to forget, is what I'm saying.
No, it doesn't. You're right. And I mean, if there were civilizations, say 20, 30,000 years ago, and if they weren't necessary, if they sort of had really alternative technologies like acoustic technology, that may be why we haven't found evidence of like a 20,000-year-old computer or a 747, because they were more advanced, but in a very different way. They didn't have electrical sockets or whatever, but they had something even better that, has bypassed us. But, I mean, it's kind of like, the final scenes of Planet of the Apes, where Charlton Heston stuff was on the
right.
Statue of Liberty. You know, the idea that nobody could have existed before us, they're just legends. You know,
Right.
maybe 50,000 years from now, people will be saying, "Oh, those legends about that worldwide race that could fly these metal machines in the sky and go to the moon. It's all just legends." And then somebody else would say, "Well, no, you know, where there's legend, there's truth," and never realizing that we really did exist, you know.
Right. Well, we're at the end. Thank you very much. But really quick, are you speaking anywhere? Do you have anything? By the way, Nick's links back to his books and everything is on the website. So just you can click on Nick Redfern. But what do you have coming up?
I'm speaking, excuse me, at an event on the weekend. I think it's March. I think it's the 22nd or the 20th is that weekend, at a place called Glen Rose in Texas, and it's called the Weird Tex Fest, and I'll be speaking there on that weekend, and I'll be speaking at the New Jersey UFO conference on the weekend of the 13th of April. And I'll be speaking at the
API,
Miami, Florida UFO conference in May.
Apicon.
Unfortunately, I don't have the information right in front of me right now, but that's pretty much accurate.
Well, so you stay busy. Do you have a new book coming out?
Yeah, I've actually got a new book out in June, and it's called Close Encounters of the Fatal Kind, and it's all about mysterious deaths in ufology, everything from like aircraft going missing, pilots dying, but also like murders of UFO researchers who've got too close to the truth, and things like suspicious heart attacks and suspicious suicides, that kind of thing.
James McDonald, specifically?
There's like McDonald, Jessup, Forrestal, the defense secretary, and then some of the more well-known ones like Thomas Mantell, the pilot,
right,
who got killed in '48 in Kentucky. So, and he covers a lot of very little-known cases where researchers have been right on top of things, and then, you know, suddenly they've just slit their wrists or whatever, just totally out the blue, allegedly, you know.
Right. Well, I want to thank you. I want to cut you off, but we've managed to just run up against it, and I got a couple of things I got to get out of the way before the end of the show.
Right,
so I will just
thanks for having me on the show. I had a good time anyway.
A lot of fun, and go check out your Stonehenge picture, man, and get back to me.
I'll definitely do that.
I'm serious. Thanks a lot, Nick. We'll speak soon.
All right. Thanks, Jimmy. See you later.
All the best.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Whew. Wow, that was just amazing. And again, I've got a weird audio change in my microphone. Wow, Keith was pointing that out to me earlier tonight. Keith, you are so right. And, okay, so anyway, really quick, I wanted to touch upon a couple of things. Again, thank you, Nick, for that. Absolutely amazing. We plan to go through just 90 minutes. And here we go. I did it again to the end of the hour. But I just wanted to get a couple of things in really quick. We wanted to go 4 days a week. And so I just wanted to address this really quick. I wanted to go 4 days a week. Keith wanted the show to go 4 days a week. And if it was up to the two of us, we would go 5 days a week. Trust me on this. It's just a matter of keeping the quality of this show up. Okay, so last week we did 4 days because we had to, and we managed to deliver quality programming. But we're back to 3 days. But Keith and I are talking, and this is the truth. This is the bottom line. If there is a way to get to 4 days a week and keep the quality of the show there, I am down for that. And that is the goal. So we do have a plan, and the plan is in place. But the quality of the show has to be there. If the quality of the show isn't there, there is no reason to go 4 days just to go 4 days. And I'm trying to address everybody's email, reaction, and everything else that is out there. Trust me, we understand, we know exactly how you feel. And we will get to 4 days. And it will be sooner than later. But it's all about the quality. And without the quality of the show, or without the quality of the guests and everything else that goes along with it, Keith and I are not going to do it. But our goal is 4 days a week. And I do get a day off. And if you ever wonder why, hey, Jimmy, man, it's easy. No, it's not. 4 days a week is it. So 3 days a week gives me Sundays off. That's what it does. Because Saturday, we're rendering and uploading past shows. Monday, I'm booking guests. Tuesday, I'm booking guests and researching and doing everything else that is involved with the show. And that's just the way that it is. All right. So, yeah. So 3 days a week gives me 1 day off. And you have to look at it in those terms. All right. Okay. All right. So just let me just say, I really appreciate it. Doing this show is a privilege. It's not a right. Special thanks to the man himself, Keith Rowland. Fade to Black executive producer is Rita Kumarian. Show is produced by Hilton J. Palm and Mark D. Kovar. Announcers are Steve Harder and Mark D. Kovar. Music, you're listening to it right now, is Doug Aldrich. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR and the Dark Matter Radio Network. See you tomorrow, everybody. Carrie Cassidy tomorrow night. Bye-bye.
Wow.